The Indiana-class established the template for American naval power in the decade before the dreadnought revolution made every preceding battleship obsolete. Authorized under the Naval Act of 1890, all three ships, USS Indiana, USS Massachusetts, and USS Oregon, were deliberately sized for coastal defense rather than oceanic projection. Their 351-foot hull was noticeably shorter than contemporary British capital ships, a compromise that made them marginally seaworthy but violently wet in any heavy sea state. The 13-inch main battery sat in twin turrets fore and aft. Elevation was limited to 15 degrees, capping effective range at roughly 9,000 yards. 8 secondary 8-inch guns occupied 2 more turrets amidships, a feature that reflected genuine doctrinal uncertainty about long-range gunnery accuracy. Oregon's 14,000-mile voyage from Puget Sound around Cape Horn to reinforce the Atlantic Squadron before Santiago in 1898 became an inadvertent argument for the Panama Canal's necessity. At Santiago, Indiana and Oregon participated in the destruction of Cervera's squadron. Their firepower was decisive, their speed was not. The 15-knot maximum allowed Cristobal Colon to run for nearly 4 hours before Oregon overtook her. The lesson that a slow battleship could not catch a fleeing cruiser was registered but not yet resolved. All three were scrapped by 1921 under Washington Naval Treaty constraints. A one-ship class, USS Iowa, represented a deliberate speed experiment against the Indiana template. The Bureau of Construction added 100 tons of displacement and extended the waterplane to achieve 17 knots, 2 knots over Indiana, at the cost of a reduced armor belt. The Bureau of Ordnance, uncomfortable with that trade, mounted a 12-inch rather than 13-inch main battery to compensate for the thinner protection. The result was a ship faster than her predecessors but marginally less protected and less heavily armed. Iowa served briefly in the Spanish-American War, stationed in the North Atlantic as part of the Flying Squadron under Commodore Winfield Scott Schley. She did not participate at Santiago. Poor strategic deployment kept her in reserve at Hampton Roads while Oregon and Indiana engaged. The missed action amplified internal Navy debates about battleship design priorities, protection versus speed versus firepower, a triangular tension that would persist through the Iowa class of the 1940s. Post-war, Iowa served in the Asiatic Fleet and saw training duty. The Navy expended her as a target ship in 1923 off Pearl Harbor, observing bomb damage from Army Air Service aircraft under Brigadier General Billy Mitchell's program. Her hull resisted longer than expected. The lesson was recorded. It was not acted upon for nearly 2 more decades. The Kearsarge class introduced the superimposed turret arrangement, placing an 8-inch twin turret directly atop each 13-inch twin turret, that would prove one of the more problematic design choices of the pre-dreadnought era. The logic was spatial efficiency. Both calibers could train on the same bearing simultaneously. The reality was muzzle blast damage. Firing the upper 8-inch guns while the lower 13-inch guns were elevated created destructive overpressure that cracked the 8-inch barbette structures over time. USS Kearsarge and USS Kentucky were completed in 1900 and served primarily in the North Atlantic Squadron. Neither saw combat action equivalent to the Spanish-American warships entering service after that conflict's conclusion. Both participated in the Great White Fleet circumnavigation between 1907 and 1909 under President Theodore Roosevelt's order, a demonstration covering 46,000 nautical miles. The superimposed turret defect was documented thoroughly during Great White Fleet operations. Repair costs were significant. Kentucky was scrapped in 1920, Kearsarge was converted to a crane vessel, redesignated AB-1, and served in that capacity until 1955, outlasting virtually every other pre-dreadnought hull by decades. The superimposed turret arrangement was not revisited in American capital ship design. The Illinois-class abandoned the Kearsarge superimposed turret experiment and returned to a conventional layout, substituting the 8-inch secondary battery with 14 6-inch guns in casemate mounts along the hull sides. This was a retrograde choice in one sense. 6-inch guns carried less punch than 8-inch, but a practical one. Casemate-mounted weapons were easier to service, more reliable under battle conditions, and cheaper to manufacture. The Bureau of Ordnance favored rate of fire over individual shell weight at intermediate ranges. USS Illinois, USS Alabama, and USS Wisconsin served throughout the early 1900s as the core of the North Atlantic Fleet. All three participated in the Great White Fleet circumnavigation. Alabama suffered a significant machinery casualty during the voyage, requiring emergency repairs at Callao, Peru, a logistical episode that strengthened arguments for permanent overseas coaling and repair stations. Wisconsin was renamed Prairie State in 1921 to free the name for new construction, serving as a training ship for Naval Reserve midshipmen through World War II until 1947. Illinois followed a similar renaming path. All three hulls were scrapped under Washington Treaty provisions. Their 13-inch guns were preserved at various shore facilities for test and training purposes through the 1930s. Authorized partly as political response to the destruction of the armored cruiser Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898, the second Maine class represented a meaningful increase in both displacement and speed. At 18 knots, Missouri and Ohio were the fastest American battleships yet commissioned, achieved through improved triple expansion engines producing 16,000 indicated horsepower. The reduction from 13-inch to 12-inch main guns was accepted in exchange for a longer, finer hull form, enabling the speed increase. USS Missouri gained lasting notoriety on April 13, 1904, when a powder charge ignited during a turret drill at Oyster Bay, New York, killing 36 men. The explosion was traced to a gun crew loading drill with live powder bags stored improperly near an open access hatch. The Bureau of Ordnance revised powder handling procedures fleet-wide within 60 days. Missouri's turret was rebuilt. The ship returned to service within a year. All three ships participated in the Great White Fleet voyage. Ohio was transferred to the Reserve Fleet in 1909 and saw minimal further service. Maine was briefly considered for retention as a training ship, but was scrapped in 1920. The class's 18-knot speed was useful intermediate data, demonstrating that larger battleships could achieve meaningful speed without reverting to cruiser-type hull ratios, data that informed the Connecticut class that followed. The Virginia class was the last American pre-dreadnought design to include substantial secondary caliber turrets alongside the main battery. 8-inch guns occupied twin turrets amidships without superimposition. The Bureau of Construction argued mixed caliber batteries remained viable for engagements under 5,000 yards. The Bureau of Ordnance was increasingly skeptical. The argument was rendered moot by HMS Dreadnought's commissioning in February 1906, which made every mixed-caliber capital ship in every navy immediately obsolescent. All 5 ships, Virginia, Nebraska, Georgia, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, completed while naval architects worldwide were recalculating every assumption about capital ship design. They were modern when laid down, they were second line when commissioned. The Great White Fleet voyage in 1907 to 1909 included all five, a diplomatic exercise that required battleships regardless of their tactical relevance. Virginia and New Jersey were expended as bombing targets in 1923 during General Billy Mitchell's much-publicized aerial attack demonstrations off the Virginia Capes. Both ships sank under bomb damage, though conditions, stationary, unmanned, undefended, were criticized as non-representative. Test results were selectively interpreted by both sides of the battleship versus air power debate for 2 more decades. Nebraska, Georgia, and Rhode Island were scrapped under Washington Treaty terms. The Connecticut-class was the largest and most powerful American pre-dreadnought design, and the last. 6 ships completed between 1906 and 1908 at a combined cost exceeding $35 million, all entering service knowing HMS Dreadnought had already redefined the category. USS Connecticut served as flagship of the Great White Fleet during the entire 14-month circumnavigation, making her the most prominent American warship of the pre-dreadnought era, even as dreadnought construction overtook her class's relevance. The 16-gun battery, 4 12-inch, 8 8-inch, 12 7-inch, was the most complex fire control problem any American battleship crew had yet faced. Simultaneous engagement with multiple calibers at different ranges required trained spotters at 3 separate control positions. Fire control doctrine was still developing. The ships were commissioned before a coherent solution existed, and gunnery scores remained mediocre through the class's first years of service. All 6 served in the Atlantic through World War I, performing convoy escort and patrol duties. Minnesota struck a mine off Fire Island in September 1918, suffering moderate flooding but no fatalities, the only combat damage sustained by the class. All 6 were scrapped in 1923. They outlasted their relevance by 17 years, their 12-inch guns reduced to shore, battery and test range use. The Connecticut-class closed an era that had already closed without them. American designers at the Bureau of Construction and Repair independently developed the all-big-gun centerline turret concept while HMS Dreadnought was under construction, a coincidence of institutional logic rather than espionage. The result was USS South Carolina and USS Michigan, the first American dreadnoughts, authorized in 1905 and commissioned in 1910 after construction extended by congressional budget disputes. They were smaller than Dreadnought at 16,000 tons, but their superfiring turret arrangement allowed all 8 12-inch guns to fire on either broadside simultaneously. Dreadnought could not achieve this. The superfiring arrangement solved the broadside problem at the cost of structural complexity. The barbette and barbette trunk of the upper turret had to be carried down through the lower turret's working space, a mechanical challenge that added weight and required meticulous maintenance to prevent binding under rotation. Both ships experienced turret training difficulties in early service, resolved through redesigned roller paths in 1912. South Carolina and Michigan served in the Atlantic and participated in the occupation of Veracruz, Mexico in 1914. Neither saw action during World War I. The Navy kept its dreadnoughts concentrated in home waters, partly from fuel logistics concerns and partly from strategic caution after Jutland. Both were scrapped under the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty. They were among the first American capital ships sacrificed to the tonnage limits. The Delaware class introduced the 10-gun, 12-inch main battery in 5 twin super-firing turrets on the center line. The Bureau used the longer hull to dramatically increase speed, 21 knots through Parsons direct-drive steam turbines, producing 25,000 shaft horsepower. USS Delaware was the first American battleship to deploy turbine propulsion as standard. USS North Dakota was fitted with experimental Curtiss turbines with reduction gearing to compare efficiency. North Dakota's geared turbines proved 12% more fuel efficient than Delaware's direct drive installation, a finding that influenced propulsion selection for subsequent classes. Both ships operated in the Atlantic Fleet through World War I, with Delaware crossing to Britain in December 1917 as part of Battleship Division 9, attached to the British Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow, the first American dreadnoughts to operate in a European theatre. Delaware participated in escorting the German High Seas Fleet to internment at Scapa Flow in November 1918. North Dakota, retained for turbine development testing, did not cross to Europe. Delaware was scrapped in 1924. North Dakota survived as a target ship until 1931, expended in aerial bombing tests gathering data on bomb damage thresholds for capital ship armor. The conclusions remained contested within the Navy's senior leadership. The Florida class was a modest evolution of Delaware, slightly heavier, marginally better protected, with an expanded secondary battery of 16 5-inch guns. Both ships deployed geared turbines as standard, settling the Delaware propulsion debate. USS Florida joined Battleship Division 9 at Scapa Flow in 1917. USS Utah operated in the same assignment. Both participated in the armistice procession escorting the German fleet to surrender in November 1918. Utah was present at the Veracruz occupation in 1914, contributing naval gunfire support when American Marines came ashore. The 12-inch guns fired approximately 300 rounds during the landing, combat experience in naval gunfire coordination that the Navy's Fire Control School incorporated into subsequent doctrine. Florida was converted to oil-burning configuration in 1925 and scrapped in 1931 under Washington Treaty tonnage limits. Utah's fate was more significant. Converted to a target and training ship in 1931, she was moored at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, where she was struck by 2 aerial torpedoes and capsized within 12 minutes. 58 crew members died. Utah's hull remains on the harbor floor as a designated memorial, one of 2 Pearl Harbor battleship losses never raised. She is the least discussed casualty of that morning, a training ship that died in a battle she was no longer equipped to fight. The Wyoming class expanded the American 12-inch battery to 12 guns in 6 super-firing twin turrets, the maximum number practicable on a single center line without producing an excessively long, narrow hull. USS Wyoming and USS Arkansas were the last American battleships armed with the 12-inch gun. Both ships served with Battleship Division 9 at Scapa Flow in World War I. Arkansas's gunnery during exercises with the Grand Fleet was assessed as below British standards, prompting revised fire control training protocols in 1918. Arkansas survived both world wars. She provided naval gunfire support during the Normandy landings on June 6, 1944, firing on German coastal batteries at Omaha Beach, 12-inch shells representing 1912 technology directed against 1944 Wehrmacht fortifications. She also bombarded Iwo Jima and Cherbourg with the same guns installed at her commissioning 3 decades earlier. Wyoming was converted to a training ship in 1931 and spent World War II training anti-aircraft gun crews. Both ships were expended in Operation Crossroads nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll in July 1946. Arkansas was sunk in the Baker underwater detonation, the submerged 21-kiloton blast that lifted her entire stern from the water before she plunged. Wyoming had already been scrapped. The Baker shot consumed 30-year-old steel and 30-year-old doctrine in the same instant. The New York class introduced the 14-inch 45 caliber main gun, adding approximately 30% more shell weight per broadside over the 12-inch battery. USS New York and USS Texas deployed reciprocating triple expansion engines rather than turbines, a controversial reversion motivated by concerns about turbine fuel consumption at cruising speed. The decision compromised speed and plant efficiency. Neither ship was ever considered fast by contemporary standards, and the choice was not repeated in subsequent classes. Texas holds a set of records no other American warship matches. She was the first U.S. Navy vessel to mount anti-aircraft guns, the first to control gunfire from a central fire control director, and the first to launch an aircraft from a fixed shipboard catapult. She served in both World Wars, at Scapa Flow with the Grand Fleet in 1917 to 1918, at Normandy on June 6, 1944, providing fire support at Omaha Beach, and at Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945. Texas's Normandy fire mission involved direct fire at 800 yards against German gun emplacements, point-blank range that exposed her 1914-era armor to anti-tank fire, but suppressed the position long enough for infantry to advance. She was designated a Texas State Memorial in 1948. New York was expended at Bikini Atoll in 1948, surviving the Baker shot only to be sunk by gunfire and aerial attack, deemed too radioactive to tow to a breaking yard. Texas remains afloat in Galveston following a major 2023 restoration. The Nevada class introduced the all-or-nothing armor philosophy, concentrating protection on a single hardened citadel surrounding the magazines, propulsion, and turret bases, leaving bow and stern lightly armored and accepting their loss. Bureau of Construction analysts determined that light splinter damage to unprotected areas was survivable. Penetration of the citadel was fatal. By concentrating weight in the citadel, the armor belt could be made thicker without increasing overall displacement. USS Nevada was struck by 1 torpedo and 5 bombs during the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941. She got underway, the only battleship to do so during the attack, and attempted to exit the harbor. Japanese aircraft shifted attack priority specifically to Nevada to sink her in the channel and block the harbor entrance. She was deliberately beached at Hospital Point to prevent this. Her damage control, executed under active attack by a crew of 2,000, has been studied at the Naval War College since. USS Oklahoma was struck by at least 9 torpedoes within minutes and capsized at her moorings. 429 men died. 32 were rescued from air pockets inside the inverted hull over the following days. Oklahoma was raised in 1943 but deemed not worth reconditioning. She sank under tow in 1947. 540 miles from Pearl Harbor in a storm that ended her second voyage. Nevada was repaired and served at Normandy, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, before being expended at Bikini. The Pennsylvania-class added a third 14-inch triple turret to the Nevada arrangement, bringing the main battery to 12 guns, the heaviest broadside of any American battleship to that point. The triple turret required precise timing of independent firing mechanisms to prevent interference. The Bureau of Ordnance solved the independent elevation problem with separate breach mechanisms synchronized by a single fire control input. The arrangement worked reliably but required more sophisticated training at the turret captain level. USS Pennsylvania was in dry dock at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the only battleship present that was not in the water. Struck by one bomb, she suffered moderate casualties and was repaired to serve extensively in the Pacific, the Aleutians Campaign, Leyte Gulf, Lingayen Gulf, and Okinawa. A kamikaze strike in August 1945, 4 days after the Nagasaki bombing, sent her to Puget Sound for repairs that were never completed. USS Arizona remains the defining casualty of December 7, 1941. A single 800-kilogram armor-piercing bomb, converted from a 16-inch naval shell, penetrated her forward deck and detonated the forward magazine at approximately 8:06 in the morning. The explosion was heard 35 miles away. Of her 1,177 deaths, the largest single ship loss in American naval history, approximately 900 remain entombed in the hull. Arizona is a national memorial. Pennsylvania was expended at Bikini Atoll in 1948. The New Mexico class completed the standard battleship concept, a doctrine requiring that all American battleships operate as a tactically interchangeable fleet unit with identical speed, turning radius, and fuel consumption to allow coordinated maneuvering at 21 knots. The standard concept sacrificed individual ship optimization for fleet cohesion, reflecting War Plan Orange's assumption that a decisive engagement with the Japanese battle fleet would be fought in the Western Pacific after a long transit. 3 ships could execute fleet maneuvers as predictably as 30 if they all moved identically. USS New Mexico was fitted with turbo-electric drive, electric motors powered by steam turbine generators rather than turbines directly connected to shafts. This arrangement allowed precise speed control and eliminated reduction gearing complexity. New Mexico's turbo-electric plant worked reliably. The system was subsequently adopted for the Tennessee and California classes. All 3 ships served extensively in the Pacific during World War II. New Mexico was struck by a kamikaze at Lingayen Gulf on January 6, 1945, killing 30 men. A second kamikaze hit her off Okinawa in May 1945, killing 54. Mississippi was present at the Battle of Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944, the last battleship versus battleship gun engagement in history, where she fired the final salvo. All 3 were scrapped in 1947. The standard concept had worked exactly as designed and was retired without a direct successor doctrine. The Tennessee class was the refinement of the New Mexico design. Similar displacement, identical standard speed, improved fire control, upgraded armor distribution. Both ships used turbo-electric drive. The 14-inch 50-caliber gun produced a muzzle velocity of 2,700 feet per second, giving shells a maximum range of 36,000 yards at full elevation, approximately 20 miles. The 50-caliber barrel length was the longest 14-inch weapon in the American inventory. USS California was among the 8 battleships at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, moored alone without a paired ship's protection. 2 torpedo hits flooded her forward spaces. A bomb hit destroyed her communications center. Crew members attempted to counter-flooded to maintain trim, but progressive flooding could not be stopped. California sank slowly over 3 days, her quarterdeck submerging last. She was refloated in April 1942 and extensively reconstructed, emerging in 1944 with new anti-aircraft batteries, tripod masts, and an altered silhouette. USS Tennessee was moored inboard of West Virginia at Pearl Harbor, protected from torpedo hits by her neighbor's hull. Damaged by 2 bomb hits and fire but remaining afloat, she was also rebuilt to a new configuration. Both ships participated in the Battle of Surigao Strait, firing 14-inch shells at the Japanese Southern Force at 22,800-yard range in the last surface gunnery exchange between capital ships. Both were scrapped in 1959, the last standard battleships to survive the post-war drawdown. The Colorado-class introduced the 16-inch main gun to American service, substituting 8 16-inch 45 caliber weapons for the 12 14-inch guns of preceding classes. Shell weight increased from 1,400 to 2,100 pounds, a 50% increase in projectile mass. The reduced gun count accepted a smaller broadside salvo weight in exchange for dramatically greater per-hit effect and maximum range. Bureau of Ordnance calculations showed that a single 16-inch hit could penetrate any contemporary armor at battle ranges. A planned 4th ship, USS Washington, was 75% complete when the Washington Naval Treaty was signed in 1922. She was expended as a target in November 1924. Gunfire and aerial bombing attacks on a nearly finished warship, representing $15 million in expenditure, deliberately sunk to comply with tonnage limits. The Navy documented the sinking to establish damage thresholds for 16-inch shell hits on 16-inch armor. The data was useful. The loss was not. USS West Virginia was struck by 7 torpedoes and 2 bombs at Pearl Harbor, sinking to the harbor floor. Her survival upright stemmed from Ensign Delano's rapid counter-flood decision. She was raised, rebuilt, and returned to service in 1944, and participated in Surigao Strait. Colorado escaped Pearl Harbor only because she was under overhaul at Puget Sound. Maryland was present but trapped outboard of Oklahoma, receiving 2 bomb hits but remaining afloat. All 3 were scrapped in 1959. The 1920 design South Dakota class would have been the most powerful battleships in the world at their projected commissioning. 6 ships authorized under the Naval Act of 1916, with design finalized in 1917 to 1919 following Jutland analysis. The 12 16-inch guns in 4 triple turrets would have delivered a broadside of 25,200 pounds, heavier than any contemporary capital ship. Speed of 23 knots would have exceeded any standard class hull by 2 knots. Construction began on all 6 hulls in 1920 to 1921. Washington Naval Treaty negotiations concluded in February 1922 before any of them reached 30% completion. All 6 were ordered demolished on the slipways or at building stages, representing approximately $67 million in expended and forfeited construction costs. Steel, already cut, machined, and assembled, was sold for scrap. Some hull sections were used as breakwaters. The names were reserved for future construction. The cancellation had a direct intellectual consequence. Naval architects who had designed the 1920 South Dakotas went on to design the Washington Treaty battleships of the 1930s. The experience of working within the treaty's 35,000-ton limit while preserving maximum firepower and protection informed every subsequent American capital ship design. The cancelled ships' blueprints were not wasted. They became the foundation for what replaced them. The North Carolina-class broke the 15-year construction pause imposed by the Washington Naval Treaty, emerging as the first American battleships laid down after restrictions relaxed under the Second London Naval Treaty's escalator clause in 1937. The design process was protracted. The Bureau of Construction submitted 16 separate design iterations between 1935 and 1937, debating 12 14-inch guns versus 9 16-inch guns within the treaty's 35,000-ton limit. Japan's invocation of the escalator clause resolved the caliber debate in favor of the 16-inch. USS Washington became the only American battleship to sink an enemy capital ship in a surface gun duel during World War II. On the night of November 14th to 15th, 1942, northeast of Guadalcanal, Washington engaged the Japanese battleship Kirishima at a range of 8,400 yards, firing a salvo approximately every 45 seconds. 7 16-inch and approximately 45-inch shells struck Kirishima within 7 minutes. She capsized within 3 hours. Washington's own damage, 0. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes of firing. USS North Carolina was struck by a Japanese submarine torpedo on September the 15th, 1942, taking a hit that opened a 32 by 18-foot hole in her bow. She maintained 25 knots, reached Tonga for emergency repairs within 2 weeks, and returned to operations with 5 crew members dead, a damage control performance that validated the all-or-nothing armor concept under real combat conditions. She earned 15 battle stars during the Pacific War. North Carolina is preserved at Wilmington as a memorial ship. The South Dakota class compressed North Carolina's firepower into a hull 48 feet shorter, achieving better armor protection at the same treaty displacement through a tighter, denser internal arrangement. The design traded interior habitability and crew comfort for tactical advantage. Machinery spaces were cramped, damage control access was restricted, and the ships ran hot in Pacific waters. 25-inch dual-purpose guns and an anti-aircraft battery that reached 96 40mm Bofors barrels by 1945 made the class a formidable air defense platform. USS South Dakota fought at the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal on November 14th to 15th, 1942, suffering a serious electrical failure that left her maneuvering without fire control. She absorbed at least 26 shell hits from Japanese cruisers, while Washington engaged Kirishima, a night that produced both the Navy's greatest battleship victory and one of its most frustrating equipment failures. South Dakota's battle damage required 3 months of repair. USS Massachusetts fired the first American 16-inch shells in anger during Operation Torch in November 1942, engaging the unfinished French battleship Jean Bart at Casablanca. USS Alabama and Massachusetts are preserved as museum ships in their namesake states. Indiana and South Dakota were scrapped in 1962. Indiana's name had been applied to both the 1895 pre-dreadnought and the 1942 super-dreadnought, a continuity of nomenclature across a 50-year span that bracketed the entire battleship era. The Iowa-class was the only American battleship design that abandoned the standard speed constraint, pushing to 33 knots through a machinery plant producing 212,000 shaft horsepower from 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers driving 4 General Electric turbines. The hull was lengthened to 887 feet to contain that plant and to provide the waterplane necessary for speed. The 16-inch 50-caliber gun fired a 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell to a maximum range of 42,345 yards. At 23 miles, a single salvo contained over 24,000 pounds of steel, moving at supersonic velocity. USS Missouri carried the most consequential document of the 20th century on her teak deck. The Japanese Instrument of Surrender was signed on her main deck on September 2, 1945, with General Douglas MacArthur presiding. She was reactivated 3 times: Korea from 1950 to 1953, Lebanon crisis in 1983 on standby, and the Gulf War in 1990 to 1991, where she fired Tomahawk cruise missiles into Iraq on January 17, 1991, and later fired 16-inch shells at Iraqi artillery positions in Kuwait. USS New Jersey holds the distinction of more combat deployments than any other American battleship: World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and Lebanon. The Iowa-class 1980s reactivation, ordered by Secretary of the Navy John Lehman under President Reagan's 600-ship Navy initiative, added Tomahawk and Harpoon missile batteries to all 4 hulls. The final decommissioning, Iowa, in 1990, closed the American battleship era permanently. No replacement was ever built. No replacement was authorized. 2 additional Iowa-class hulls were authorized and begun but never completed. B-65 Illinois was cancelled on August 11, 1945, 3 days after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, while her keel was barely laid. The decision required no elaborate analysis. The strategic landscape had shifted in an afternoon. Illinois' contract was terminated, her steel redistributed to other programs, her name retired without ceremony. BB-66. Kentucky had a longer, stranger career. Laid down on December 6, 1942, one day before the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor, she was construction paused in 1946 at approximately 19% completion, suspended again multiple times through the late 1940s and early 1950s as the Navy debated guided missile conversion studies. At one point, Kentucky was considered for conversion to a guided missile battleship, replacing her 16-inch turrets with surface-to-air and surface-to-surface missile batteries. The conversion was estimated to cost more than new construction. It was abandoned. Kentucky's bow section was removed and welded onto USS Wisconsin in 1956, after Wisconsin suffered a collision with the destroyer USS Eaton that sheared 68 feet from her bow. The transplant was completed in 16 days and 16 hours, the largest emergency repair in battleship history. Kentucky's remaining hull was sold for scrapping in 1958. Her bow sailed for another 35 years on Wisconsin. The last piece of the last-built American battleship hull was decommissioned in Norfolk in 1991. The Montana-class was the final American battleship design, and the only post-treaty design that made no concession to Panama Canal beam limits. At 100 to 21 feet wide, the Montanas could not transit the canal, accepting strategic inflexibility in exchange for armor and firepower the Iowa-class could not match. The 12 16-inch 50-caliber guns in 4 triple turrets would have delivered a 32,400-pound broadside. The waterline armor belt was designed at 16.1 inches thick. The class was designed explicitly to defeat any contemporary battleship then existing or under construction. All 5 hulls, Montana, Ohio, Maine, New Hampshire, and Louisiana, were authorized in the Two-Ocean Navy Act of July 1940. None was ever laid down. The Navy suspended Montana-class construction in May 1942 to redirect shipyard capacity to carrier construction following the losses of Lexington and Yorktown in the Coral Sea and Midway battles. A 70,000-ton battleship required the same shipyard resources as 2 fleet carriers. The carriers won the argument by winning the battles. The cancellation was made permanent in July 1943. The Montana class represents the maximum theoretical expression of the battleship concept, cancelled before it was built because the concept it expressed had already been surpassed. 5 names, 5 complete design packages, 5 keels, never cut. The most powerful battleships ever designed by the United States exist only on paper. A final statement about what the battleship could have been, issued at the exact moment the battleship ceased to matter. Commissioned in 1894 and 1895, the protected cruisers USS Columbia and USS Minneapolis represented the United States Navy's first serious engagement with the cruiser concept as a genuine strategic instrument of global power. At their initial sea trials, Columbia shattered records by achieving an astonishing 22.8 knots, instantly making them the fastest warships in the world. This blistering speed represented American marine engineering at its absolute finest, proving to European empires that domestic shipyards could compete on the global stage. However, this unmatched velocity came at a staggering tactical price. To achieve such speed, designers packed the hulls with massive, resource-heavy propulsion machinery. This engineering choice consumed the vast majority of the ship's available displacement, leaving vital firepower and armor protection as mere design afterthoughts. Consequently, these greyhounds of the fleet lacked the combat staying power required for prolonged surface warfare. By 1907, both vessels were obsolete and placed in reserve, ultimately being sold for scrapping before 1922. Though their operational careers were relatively brief, their true legacy was symbolic, decisively proving that American industrial capability was ready to build a modern, world-class navy capable of projecting power across oceans. Commissioned on February 5, 1895, USS Olympia holds an legendary place in naval history as the oldest steel-hulled American warship still afloat. Serving as Commodore George Dewey's flagship for the Asiatic Squadron during the Spanish-American War, this historic vessel became the vanguard of American imperialism. From her bridge on May 1, 1898, Dewey uttered the immortal command that echoed through history, "You may fire when you are ready, Gridley." What followed was the Battle of Manila Bay, a devastating 7-hour engagement. Olympia and her squadron systematically obliterated the entire Spanish Asiatic fleet of 7 warships. Remarkably, the Americans achieved total victory with 0 fatalities from enemy fire, instantly catapulting the nation into the ranks of global superpowers. Olympia continued her distinguished service through 1921, famously performing her final sacred duty by carrying the body of World War I's unknown soldier from the battlefields of France back home to Washington, D.C. Today, she is preserved as a museum ship at Penn's Landing in Philadelphia. Though her aging hull faces persistent structural and funding concerns, she remains an enduring monument to the dawn of modern American naval dominance. The Pennsylvania-class armored cruisers, consisting of 6 massive warships commissioned between 1905 and 1908, represented the absolute zenith of American armored cruiser development at the turn of the 20th century. Displacing a formidable 13,680 tons each, these steel titans were wrapped in a heavy 6-inch Harvey steel armor belt. They were engineered to bridge the gap between swift scouting cruisers and slow, heavily armed battleships. The construction of this class demonstrated to foreign rivals that the United States could manufacture capital ships of genuine international quality and endurance. They were the pride of the fleet, showcasing American industrial maturity. However, naval technology was advancing at a breakneck pace. The arrival of the British HMS Dreadnought and the subsequent rise of the battlecruiser rapidly rendered these heavily armoured gun platforms obsolete before they could ever face a peer competitor in battle. During World War I, they were relegated to convoy escort duties far from the dramatic fleet actions for which they were built. Ultimately, ships like the Pennsylvania and West Virginia were sold for scrapping in 1931, victims of the Washington Naval Treaty and relentless technological obsolescence. The Omaha-class light cruisers, featuring 10 sleek vessels commissioned between 1923 and 1925, were the first American cruisers designed entirely in the post-World War I era. Built for high-speed scouting operations, these ships were simultaneously a masterclass in Great War lessons and a collection of severe design compromises. On paper, their capabilities were impressive. They achieved a genuine roaring top speed of 35 knots, allowing them to outrun almost anything afloat. However, this focus on speed left them hopelessly inadequate for the brutal realities of the conflicts that erupted 20 years later. Their primary flaw lay in their anti-aircraft defense. The minimal gun layouts were completely insufficient against the devastating wave of carrier-based aircraft that dominated the Pacific War from 1941 to 1945. Despite these glaring technical vulnerabilities, the Omaha class achieved an extraordinary operational record. All 10 ships survived the fierce combat of World War II. They served honorably in secondary theaters, shore bombardment, and convoy protection. By the conflict's conclusion, these technically obsolescent warriors had reached the end of their operational usefulness, and every single ship in the class was sold and scrapped by 1949. The Pensacola-class heavy cruisers, comprising the USS Pensacola and USS Salt Lake City, both commissioned in 1930, were the vanguard of a new era. They were the very first American heavy cruisers constructed under the strict structural limitations imposed by the landmark Washington Naval Treaty. To pack a devastating main battery of 10 8-inch guns onto a treaty-compliant hull, naval architects made a dangerous, calculated gamble. They accepted paper-thin hull protection, wrapping the ships in a meager 63 to 76 mm armor belt. This high-stakes design perfectly reflected interwar American naval doctrine, which stubbornly assumed that superior speed and overwhelming long-range firepower could effectively substitute for heavy armor protection in a surface engagement. The Pacific War would brutally test this theory. Both ships fought tenaciously across the blood-soaked waters of the Pacific, surviving multiple heavy engagements despite their lack of protection, earning them a reputation as legendary survivors. Having outlived the war, their final reward was a grim one. In 1946, both battered veterans were expended as target ships during the cataclysmic Bikini Atoll atomic bomb tests, closing the chapter on America's first treaty-limited heavy cruisers. The Northampton-class heavy cruisers, a group of 6 ships commissioned between 1930 and 1931, achieved a tragic distinction during World War II. They lost half of their total number to ferocious enemy action in the Pacific theater, suffering the worst attrition rate of any United States cruiser class in modern naval history. The statistics tell a harrowing story of intense, unyielding combat. USS Northampton was torpedoed and sent to the bottom during the chaotic night action at the Battle of Tassafaronga on November 30th, 1942. The legendary USS Houston met a grim end in the Sunda Strait on February 28, 1942, sinking with approximately 1,000 brave crew members still aboard. Rounding out the losses, USS Chicago was fatally crippled by Japanese aerial torpedoes at Rennell Island in January 1943. This devastating 50% loss rate stood as a stark, bloody indictment of early American cruiser doctrine. Analysts realized that planners had fatally underestimated the lethal range, speed, and nighttime concealment capabilities of Japanese oxygen-powered Type 93 long-lance torpedoes, forcing the US Navy to rewrite its tactical manual under fire. The Portland-class heavy cruisers, consisting of the USS Portland and USS Indianapolis, are forever linked to one of the most harrowing chapters in military folklore. The legacy of this 2-ship class is entirely inseparable from the tragic fate of the Indianapolis, the last American cruiser lost to enemy action in combat, and the site of the United States Navy's worst single disaster at sea. On July 30th, 1945, having just completed a top-secret mission to deliver enriched uranium components for the Little Boy atomic bomb to Tinian Island, the lone cruiser was ambushed. The Japanese submarine I-58 struck her with 2 torpedoes at 0:15. The shattered warship foundered and sank in just 12 minutes. Of the 1,196 crewmen on board, roughly 900 made it into the water alive. What followed was a 4-day nightmare of dehydration, exposure, and relentless, horrific shark attacks in the open ocean before an accidental air patrol spotted them. By the time rescuers arrived, only 316 men remained alive. The tragedy of the Indianapolis cast a somber shadow over the impending Allied victory, ensuring the class a permanent, heartbreaking place in naval history. The New Orleans-class heavy cruisers featured 7 advanced vessels commissioned between 1934 and 1937. Representing the pinnacle of interwar design, these ships were the best protected American treaty cruisers of their era, boasting a robust 127mm armored belt built to withstand 8-inch enemy shells. Yet, despite this superior engineering, the class suffered a catastrophic blow early in World War II. In a single, devastating engagement on August 9, 1942, the infamous Battle of Savo Island, 3 of the 7 sisters were completely destroyed. USS Astoria, USS Quincy, and USS Vincennes were caught unprepared and sunk within 32 chaotic minutes as Vice Admiral Mikawa's cruiser force executed a flawless, brutally practiced night torpedo, and gunfire attack. It was a humiliating wake-up call for American forces. However, the story did not end there. The 4 surviving ships of the class shook off the disaster and went on to fight with vengeful fury across every major campaign of the Pacific War. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, these heavily armored survivors accumulated brilliant combat records, providing vital anti-aircraft protection for carriers and hammering enemy positions until total victory was achieved. Commissioned on February 16, 1939, USS Wichita holds a unique place in naval architecture as the very last American heavy cruiser built under the strict constraints of the Washington Naval Treaty. Displacing precisely 10,000 tons at standard load, Wichita was a brilliant design triumph. Engineers finally managed to extract the absolute maximum amount of armor protection possible within the treaty's rigid limits. They accomplished this feat by cleverly combining the advanced, stable hull form of the Brooklyn-class light cruiser with a heavy cruiser's devastating 9-gun, 8-inch main battery. The result was a warship protected by a formidable 152mm main armor belt, making her the most resilient and well-protected American heavy cruiser of the entire interwar era. Wichita served with distinction across multiple theaters during World War II, protecting vital convoys in the icy Atlantic and providing heavy gunfire support during intense Pacific Island hopping campaigns. She survived the war intact and was eventually sold for scrapping in 1959. Her commissioning effectively marked the historic end of the treaty cruiser era, paving the way for the unrestricted, heavily armed steel giants of wartime production. The Brooklyn and St. Louis classes, encompassing 13 formidable light cruisers commissioned starting in 1938, were the United States Navy's direct, tactical response to Japan's heavily armed Mogami-class warships. These innovative vessels were designed to maximize firepower while adhering to international treaty limits, packing an astonishing 15 6-inch guns housed within 5 triple turrets. This unique, rapid-firing configuration gave each Brooklyn-class cruiser a devastating broadside capability that actually exceeded the total weight of fire delivered by many contemporary heavy cruisers. Their immense fire volume proved incredibly lethal during the chaotic night actions of the Pacific War. Following World War II, several of these battle-tested ships were sold to South American navies where they enjoyed surprisingly long second careers. Among them was the Argentine cruiser, General Belgrano, formerly known as the USS Phoenix. In a tragic postscript to the class's history, the Belgrano was torpedoed and sunk by the British nuclear submarine HMS Conqueror on May 2, 1982, during the Falklands War. The sinking resulted in 323 Argentine casualties, marking a dramatic and bloody end for a legendary hull design. The Cleveland-class light cruisers represented the absolute backbone of the wartime United States surface fleet. With 27 hulls completed between 1942 and 1946, out of a staggering 52 originally ordered, it stood as the most numerous cruiser class in American history. 9 additional hulls were cleverly re-engineered during construction to become Independence-class escort carriers, showcasing the adaptability of the design. These versatile warships were packed with dual-purpose 6-inch main guns and a dense array of anti-aircraft weapons, making them the ultimate defense shields for vulnerable, fast-carrier task forces. Despite facing the full fury of Japanese kamikaze attacks, heavy conventional bombing, and fierce surface engagements, the class achieved an almost miraculous milestone. Not a single Cleveland-class cruiser was sunk by enemy action during the entirety of World War II. Their rugged construction and advanced damage control systems kept them fighting through the worst the enemy could throw at them. Several of these dependable combatants were reactivated to provide vital gunfire support during the Korean War, before the last remaining hulls were finally retired, sold, or scrapped by 1971. The Baltimore-class heavy cruisers, with 14 impressive warships completed between 1943 and 1946, were the first American cruisers designed entirely without the artificial constraints of interwar naval treaties. Displacing a massive 13,600-ton standard, these heavy combatants vividly demonstrated what American naval architects had known for over a decade. The old 10,000-ton treaty limit had forced a dangerous, fundamental mismatch between a ship's heavy armament and its defensive protection. Unshackled from political restrictions, designers built the Baltimore-class with thick, comprehensive armor schemes capable of withstanding 8-inch shells, while maintaining an aggressive top speed and a devastating 9-gun main battery. These balanced, heavily armoured Titans arrived in the Pacific just in time to spearhead the final, crushing drives against the Japanese Empire, providing unmatched anti-aircraft screening and devastating shore bombardment. Their exceptional hull design proved so robust and adaptable that several vessels were selected for extensive conversions into guided missile cruisers during the Cold War era of the 1950s and 1960s. These modifications dramatically extended the class's operational relevance, keeping these World War II-born hulls in active service through the early 1980s. The Alaska-class large cruisers, represented by the towering USS Alaska and her sister ship USS Guam, commissioned in June and September of 1944, occupied an ambiguous, controversial design space somewhere between a traditional heavy cruiser and a full-scale battleship. Displacing a massive 29,779-ton standard and bristling with 9 formidable 12-inch main guns, these steel monsters remain the largest cruisers ever completed by the United States. They were originally conceived as a specialized high-speed counter to rumored German and Japanese commerce-raiding supercruisers. However, by the time these magnificent vessels finally arrived in the combat zones of the Pacific, that specific threat had completely vanished. Instead, they were utilized primarily as oversized escort ships, using their extensive anti-aircraft batteries to protect fast carrier task forces and bombarding enemy shore positions during the bloody campaigns for Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Finding them immensely expensive to operate and lacking a clear strategic purpose in the post-war world, the Navy decommissioned both Alaska and Guam in 1947. Their active operational lives lasted less than 3 years, leaving them as fascinating, short-lived white elephants of wartime naval design. The Des Moines-class heavy cruisers, featuring 3 magnificent warships completed between 1948 and 1949, represent the absolute evolutionary endpoint of the gun cruiser concept. They were the final and most technologically advanced gun-centric cruisers ever constructed by any navy in world history. The defining feature of this incredible class was its revolutionary, rapid-fire, 8-inch main battery. Utilizing an advanced, fully automatic loading system, these weapons could unleash an astonishing 10 rounds per minute per gun. This enabled a single Des Moines-class ship to deliver a staggering 30 round per minute broadside from its 9 main barrels, unleashing an overwhelming wall of high explosive steel that no subsequent cruiser design has ever equaled. However, their timing could not have been worse. Of the 12 massive ships originally planned, only 3 were completed before the rapid dawn of the guided missile era rendered traditional gun-based capital ships completely redundant. The class stands as a poignant historical example of technological perfection achieved at the exact moment of strategic obsolescence. A masterpiece of mechanical engineering built for a style of naval warfare that had already vanished from the world's oceans. The Worcester-class anti-aircraft light cruisers, consisting of the USS Worcester and USS Roanoke, both completed in 1948, were engineered to counter the terrifying evolution of high-speed aerial threats. Of the 10 massive vessels originally ordered by a wartime navy, only these 2 were ever completed. The entire design revolved around a revolutionary, dual-purpose 6-inch main gun system. These cutting-edge, twin-mounted weapons utilized an advanced automatic loading mechanism, allowing them to rapidly engage both distant surface targets and high-altitude enemy aircraft with equal lethality. They were intended to form an impenetrable wall of flak around post-war carrier groups. Yet, just as the class entered active service, the rapid advent of early guided missile technology completely transformed the landscape of naval warfare. Recognizing that long-range missiles would soon replace traditional gun systems as the primary fleet air defense weapon, the Navy abruptly cancelled the remaining 8 ships of the order. The Worcester-class represented the most sophisticated, highly developed iteration of the gun-based anti-aircraft cruiser concept ever built, yet they were transiently sidelined because the very concept of gun defense had been entirely superseded by a new technological era. Commissioned on September 9, 1961, the USS Long Beach holds a monumental place in military history as the world's very first nuclear-powered surface warship. Strikingly futuristic for her era, she carried absolutely no conventional main gun battery when she first joined the fleet. Her sleek, boxy superstructure was the physical embodiment of the Navy's early 1960s conviction that guided missiles had permanently superseded naval guns in modern warfare. Powered by 2 cutting-edge C-1W nuclear reactors, Long Beach possessed virtually limitless operational endurance. This incredible capability was famously demonstrated in 1964 during Operation Sea Orbit, where she joined the carrier USS Enterprise and USS Bainbridge to form an all-nuclear task force. Together, they circled the entire globe in just 64 days without a single refueling stop. Long Beach served her country with distinction for over 34 years before being decommissioned in 1995. While her advanced nuclear machinery gave her unparalleled strategic range, it also presented a major financial challenge later on, saddling the Navy with an extraordinary, highly complex decommissioning and reactor disposal cost at the end of her long, historic career. The Leahy-class guided missile cruisers, a group of 9 sophisticated warships commissioned between 1962 and 1964, represented a major leap forward in Cold War fleet air defense. Originally classified as destroyer leaders, these specialized vessels were officially redesignated as guided missile cruisers during the Navy's major fleet realignment in 1975. The hallmark of the Leahy design was the introduction of the innovative double-ender missile configuration. This layout placed advanced surface-to-air missile launchers at both the bow and the stern of the ship, completely eliminating blind spots and providing an impenetrable 360-degree layer of anti-aircraft missile coverage for vulnerable carrier strike groups. Throughout the tense decades of the Cold War, these dependable cruisers tracked Soviet threats across the world's oceans. However, by the early 1990s, their legacy drew to a close. All 9 ships of the class were systematically decommissioned between 1993 and 1995. They were retired to make way for the revolutionary Ticonderoga-class Aegis cruisers, which assumed the critical fleet air defense mission with vastly superior radar capabilities and automated fire control systems that rendered the older Leahy-class obsolete. The United States Navy's nuclear-powered guided missile cruiser program represented a bold, decades-long commitment to creating an unstoppable blue-water surface fleet powered entirely by the atom. This ambitious initiative ultimately produced 7 highly sophisticated warships spanning 4 distinct classes, beginning with the pioneering USS Bainbridge in 1962 and culminating in the 4 heavily armed Virginia-class cruisers commissioned between 1976 and 1980. These nuclear titans offered commanders unprecedented tactical flexibility, capable of steaming at high speeds indefinitely to protect carrier groups without ever needing a replenishment oiler. Yet, despite their incredible performance, the program met a premature and controversial end. All 7 nuclear cruisers were abruptly decommissioned between 1994 and 1999. The premature retirement occurred when Congress flatly refused to fund the immensely expensive mid-life reactor refueling overhauls that these complex vessels required. It remains one of the most striking fiscal decisions in naval history. 7 highly capable capital ships, with 25 to 30 years of potential service life remaining, were permanently retired and sent to the scrapyard simply because the nation balked at the upfront cost of their nuclear fuel. The Belknap-class guided missile cruisers, consisting of 9 capable warships commissioned between 1964 and 1967, were the physical manifestation of an intense doctrinal debate gripping the post-war United States Navy. Designers were fiercely divided over whether early guided missiles had sufficiently proven their reliability to justify completely abandoning conventional guns. As a compromise, the Belknap-class carried a single Terrier surface-to-air missile launcher forward while maintaining a single 5-inch gun aft for shore bombardment and close-in defense. However, the class is tragically best remembered for a catastrophic accident. On November 22, 1975, while conducting hazardous night maneuvers in heavy seas, USS Belknap collided with the massive aircraft carrier USS John F. Kennedy. The carrier's overhanging flight deck sheared directly through Belknap's lightweight aluminum superstructure, fracturing fuel lines and igniting a horrific, raging aviation fuel fire. The disaster claimed the lives of 8 brave crew members and completely melted the cruiser's upper decks. In a testament to robust hull construction, the shattered ship was meticulously rebuilt from the deck up, returning to active fleet service in 1980. The Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers, with 27 sophisticated ships commissioned between 1983 and 1994, represent the final generation of American cruisers that will ever sail the oceans. The heart of these lethal warships is the revolutionary AN/SPY one-phased array Aegis radar system, capable of simultaneously tracking over 100 targets and guiding missiles against multiple vectors. Armed with 122 Mark 41 vertical launch system cells, they carry a devastating mix of standard area defense missiles, Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, and anti-submarine weapons. The class proved its immense strategic value on January 17, 1991, when USS Bunker Hill fired the opening Tomahawk salvos of Operation Desert Storm, striking Iraqi command installations with pinpoint accuracy. Yet, an era is ending. The remaining ships are scheduled for phased decommissioning between 2027 and 2029 as advanced flight. 3 Arleigh Burke and planned DDG-X destroyers assume the Aegis mantle. No direct replacement cruiser is planned. When the final Ticonderoga decommissions, the United States Navy will operate without a single cruiser in its active inventory, bringing a historic ship designation present in the American fleet since 1890 to a permanent, silent conclusion. On April 11, 1900, the United States Navy forever altered naval warfare by purchasing its very first submarine for $150,000, the USS Holland. Designed by inventor John Philip Holland after 25 years of grueling experimentation, this 53-foot, 74-ton vessel became the genetic blueprint for every American submarine that followed. Driven by a revolutionary dual propulsion system, the Holland utilized a gasoline internal combustion engine for surface cruising and electric motors for underwater operations. However, this early technology carried terrifying risks. Volatile gasoline vapors trapped inside the sealed steel hull created constant explosion hazards, a deadly reality that ultimately forced the Navy to pivot towards safer diesel power in future classes. Though her active career was brief, serving primarily as a training and experimental torpedo testing vessel until 1905, the Holland proved that a crew could submerge, navigate, and surface reliably on command. Sold in August 1913 for a mere $4,700, her true value was immeasurable. The operational lessons extracted from this single primitive hull birthed a century of underwater dominance, transforming a modest gamble into the most consequential investment in American naval history. This bold leap into the deep forever changed the parameters of global naval strategy. Entering service in 1903, the Plunger class, designated as the A-class, marked the United States Navy's transition from experimental prototypes to its first true production submarine fleet. Consisting of 7 distinct boats from the SS-2 Plunger to the SS-7 Moccasin, these vessels were engineered to be longer and heavier than the original Holland. Crucially, they doubled the offensive firepower by carrying 2 torpedo tubes instead of 1, while incorporating refined battery arrangements that extended submerged endurance from a mere 60 minutes to 3 full hours. The lead boat, Plunger, was commissioned on September 19, 1903. Serving as her second lieutenant was a brilliant young officer named Chester W. Nimitz, who would rise to command the entire Pacific Fleet 38 years later during World War II. Nimitz's early, dangerous experiences aboard these primitive craft deeply shaped his understanding of submarine vulnerabilities, direct knowledge that later informed the devastating Pacific Undersea Campaign he directed from 1941 to 1945. Operating primarily around Rhode Island and Long Island Sound, the A-class established the Navy's very first systematic operational doctrine. Though all 7 were retired by 1920, they forged the inaugural generation of American submariners. Their hard-won expertise laid a vital foundation for the global naval challenges ahead. The 14 submarines of the B through F classes, commissioned between 1907 and 1912, documented a critical technical evolution. The dangerous transition from volatile gasoline to reliable diesel propulsion. Early B-class boats stubbornly retained gasoline engines, suffering catastrophic internal hazards as explosive vapors accumulated in their tight spaces. A major breakthrough arrived with the E-class in 1912, which became the first American submarines built with diesel engines for surface propulsion, successfully eliminating the explosive vapor threat that had plagued early crews. Simultaneously, physical capabilities expanded dramatically. The D-class marked the Navy's first major increase in size. The D-1 displaced 288 tons surfaced and wielded 4 torpedo tubes, shifting the submarine's role from passive coastal defense to proactive offensive operations. The subsequent F-class pushed this concept further, reaching 400 tons and expanding battery capacities to achieve an impressive 8 hours of submerged endurance. Although all 14 vessels served exclusively in training roles during World War I without conducting active combat patrols, their development was vital. The noticeable experience gap between American and British submariners in 1917 ultimately shaped the extensive interwar investments that prepared the fleet for the Pacific War. This technological leap proved foundational for future operations. Representing the first massive expansion of American undersea power, the 49 submarines of the K through O classes, built between 1914 and 1918, revolutionized fleet design. Each class built incrementally upon the lessons of its predecessors. The K-class introduced a twin-screw arrangement that dramatically improved underwater maneuvering. The L-class pushed displacement past 450 tons, extending operational range to 5,000 miles. Finally, the O-class at 521 tons and 172 feet established the structural template for future fleet submarines. World War I provided these boats their first true operational deployment. Several O-class submarines sailed to the Azores in 1918 to conduct grueling Atlantic patrols, marking the first time American submarines operated from a foreign base. However, the O-class suffered a sobering peacetime loss record. The O-5 sank after a violent collision in 1923, and the O-9 collapsed during a tragic test dive in June 1941, killing 33 sailors. These devastating losses forced the Navy to completely overhaul its collision and flooding safety procedures. These deadly accidents prior to Pearl Harbor served as the fleet's most expensive training, paid for with the lives of brave sailors. Their sacrifice secured invaluable safety protocols for generations to come. The R-class submarines, with 27 boats commissioned between 1918 and 1919, introduced a lethal revolution to the undersea arsenal, the 21-inch torpedo tube. Replacing the smaller 18-inch standard, this caliber upgrade accommodated far more powerful warheads and ultimately enabled the development of the Mark 14 torpedo series, a weapon that would later prove controversially unreliable during the Pacific War. Despite their aging designs, these boats stepped up when World War II erupted. The R-1 deployed to the hostile waters of the South Atlantic in 1942, operating from Brazil to hunt deadly German U-boats. Tragedy struck the class on June 12, 1943, when the R-12 suffered a catastrophic accident during a routine battery charging exercise off Key West. Her forward torpedo room flooded instantly, sending the vessel 600 feet down into the abyss and claiming 42 crew members. The R-12 was the only R-class submarine lost to operational causes during the entire war. This pioneering class, which fundamentally established the modern torpedo standard for the United States Navy, vanished from active duty just as atomic power approached. The last surviving boat was decommissioned in September 1946. They left behind a proud legacy of critical adaptation and essential tactical service across two world eras. The iconic S-class represented a bold experiment, becoming the first American submarine fleet constructed in massive numbers using competing designs from three separate shipbuilders. Commissioned between 1920 and 1924, 51 of these rugged boats entered service. By the time the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, 29 S-boats remained active, thrusting these obsolete vessels onto the front lines of World War II. Despite mechanical limitations, they achieved legendary milestones. On August 27, 1942, the S-38 sank the Japanese freighter Hayo Maru, securing the Navy's first submarine kill of the war using a functioning torpedo. This qualification was grimly accurate. The new Mark 14 torpedoes suffered from faulty depth-keeping and non-detonating contact exploders, causing agonizing misses until mid-1943. Still, the S-boats fought fiercely. The S-44 executed a daring attack to sink the heavy cruiser Kako on August 10, 1942, before her own tragic destruction by enemy destroyers in October 1943. The combat record of the S-class was defined by raw courage against overwhelming technical odds. They held the line in the dark early days of the war until modern fleet submarines arrived with reliable weapons to finish the job. Their relentless determination proved that American sailors could endure any hardship to secure victory. Commissioned between 1932 and 1933, the three intermediate submarines of the Dolphin and Cachalot classes represented a high-stakes institutional compromise. Naval architects attempted to reconcile competing requirements for high fleet speed and long-range patrol endurance, all while operating under the strict weight limitations mandated by the Washington Naval Treaty. Ultimately, none of these three vessels conducted significant combat operations during World War II. Instead, they earned historical significance for what they represented institutionally: the final line of American submarines designed around the archaic pre-war fleet concept. This flawed philosophy assumed submarines would act merely as scouts for surface battleships, rather than the aggressive, independent commerce raiders that the harsh realities of the Pacific War actually demanded. The Navy's interwar design philosophy had inadvertently produced highly specialized boats optimized for a theoretical war that was never fought. When global conflict finally erupted, the crucible of combat demanded an entirely different breed of weapon. Fortunately, that solution was already in rapid production at the Electric Boat Company and Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, designed by visionary engineers who had spent a decade anticipating the brutal, isolated requirements of a true Pacific Ocean war. Their forward-thinking blueprints would soon revolutionize the global theater of naval warfare. The Porpoise class, consisting of 8 boats commissioned between 1935 and 1937, represented the first truly coherent American fleet submarine design. By abandoning the chaotic competing builder experiment of the earlier S-class, the Navy finally established a standardized hull blueprint. These pioneering vessels introduced the revolutionary saddle tank ballast configuration, which allowed for dramatically faster flooding and diving operations. This technical breakthrough slashed crash dive times from an anxious 60 seconds down to an impressive sub-40 seconds, a vital margin of survival when evading enemy aircraft. When the disaster at Pearl Harbor thrust America into World War II in December 1941, these ready boats immediately deployed to frontline war patrols. They struck back fast. The Pike sank the Japanese destroyer Yamakaze in June 1942, while the Tarpon destroyed the converted gunboat Ryujo Maru in February 1943. Yet, the war took a heavy toll. The Shark was tragically lost around February 11, 1942, off the Dutch East Indies, leaving no survivors and no definitive account of her final moments. Nevertheless, the Porpoise-class successfully introduced enduring design standards that persisted through every single American fleet submarine built for the remainder of World War II. Their robust architecture proved indispensable for achieving eventual oceanic victory. Commissioned between 1937 and 1939, the 17 submarines of the Salmon and Sargo classes revolutionized underwater firepower by introducing a heavy, standardized 8-torpedo tube configuration, 4 forward and 4 aft. Crucially, they incorporated the Navy's first mechanical analog fire control system, the Torpedo Data Computer. This advanced technology automatically calculated complex firing solutions from target bearing, range, speed, and course. Yet, these highly capable vessels were crippled by their primary weapon, the infamous Mark 14 torpedo. For the first 20 months of World War II, the Mark 14's systemic failures defined the undersea campaign. The weapon suffered from 3 distinct, infuriating defects. It consistently ran 10 feet deeper than its setting, its magnetic exploder failed in Pacific conditions, and its contact exploder jammed on perpendicular hits. Submariners suffered 2 years of denied kills while commanders blamed the crews. The Sargo was among the first to report these critical failures in meticulous detail. The Navy bureaucracy stubbornly denied the crisis until a definitive investigation finally corrected the flaws in September 1943. Only then did these brave crews receive a weapon that actually worked, concluding a tragic chapter of institutional denial. This hard-won victory over bureaucratic ignorance paved the way for absolute undersea mastery. Commissioned on the eve of global conflict, the 18 submarines of the Tambor and Gar classes expanded torpedo firepower to a maximum of 10 tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft. This dense weapon arrangement was the absolute limit achievable within a 307-foot hull without sacrificing vital fuel capacity or crew quarters needed for grueling 75-day Pacific patrols. These formidable warships formed the offensive core of America's early undersea campaign. In June 1942, the lead boat, Tambor, witnessed one of the most consequential moments of the Battle of Midway. Her sudden periscope contact with a Japanese cruiser force panicked the enemy into evasive maneuvers, causing the heavy cruisers Mogami and Mikuma to collide violently. The crippled Mikuma was subsequently destroyed by American dive bombers. Ironically, Tambor fired no torpedoes. Her mere presence altered the course of the battle. Yet this era also brought horrific tragedy. In August 1942, the Grunion vanished in Alaskan waters. Modern evidence discovered in 2007 revealed a grim reality. She was sunk by her own torpedo when it suffered a fatal steering malfunction and circled back, killing 70 brave men. The weapon meant to destroy the enemy had destroyed its own creators. Their ultimate sacrifice was never forgotten. The legendary Gato class was the weapon that won the brutal undersea war in the Pacific. Comprising 77 mass-produced boats commissioned between 1941 and 1944, this class conducted a merciless commerce-raiding campaign that strangled the Japanese Empire. Gato-class submarines were responsible for sinking 55% of all Japanese merchant tonnage lost during World War II, sending 1,314 merchant vessels totaling over 5 million tons to the bottom of the ocean. Furthermore, they destroyed 201 enemy naval warships, effectively severing the vital supply lines connecting Japan's home islands to its stolen resource empire. By 1945, Japanese rice imports had collapsed by 90%. But this absolute maritime dominance was bought with blood. 18 Gato-class submarines were lost to savage enemy action. Among them was the USS Wahoo, one of the most highly decorated submarines in American naval history. Under the aggressive command of Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, the Wahoo terrorized enemy shipping until October 11th, 1943, when she was relentlessly depth-charged and sunk in the La Perouse Strait, taking all 80 crew members to a silent, watery grave. Their lethal record secured an immortal place in the annals of military history. While externally identical to the preceding Gato class, the formidable Balao-class was structurally engineered for a far more brutal brand of undersea warfare. Its pressure hull utilized thick, high-yield steel that dramatically increased its operational test depth from 300 to 400 feet, giving crews a crucial edge when evading deep depth-charge attacks. With 122 boats commissioned between 1943 and 1945, the Balao-class became the largest submarine production program in United States history. At the peak of wartime mobilization in 1944, the Electric Boat Company was completing a brand new submarine every single 2 weeks. Of these, the USS Tang, under the aggressive command of Commander Richard O'Kane, achieved a legendary record, sinking 33 enemy ships totaling over 116,000 tons. Tragically, on October 24, 1944, the Tang was destroyed by her very last torpedo, which ran erratically and circled back to strike the vessel. O'Kane and 8 crew members standing on deck miraculously survived the explosion, only to endure brutal captivity as prisoners of war. O'Kane later received the Medal of Honor in 1946. This ironic disaster highlighted that even the deadliest predators faced fatal hazards from their own weapons. The Tench class stood as the absolute pinnacle and most refined evolution of America's wartime fleet submarine design. While 124 of these formidable boats were originally planned, only 51 were commissioned before Japan's sudden surrender in August 1945 brought an abrupt end to the emergency production. The massive program cancellations that immediately followed cleared the shipyards, scrapping unfinished submarines right on the ways and demobilizing production lines that had been operating around the clock for 4 years. Yet, the Tench-class boats that entered service proved to be the longest-lived American submarines of the pre-nuclear era. Beginning in 1947, several were systematically modernized under the revolutionary Greater Underwater Propulsion Power, or GUPPY, program. These extensive overhauls integrated streamlined fairwaters, massively enlarged battery plants, and advanced snorkel systems, allowing the converted hulls to remain highly active into the late 1970s. A prime example was the USS Thornback, converted to a guppy configuration in 1952. She served faithfully until 1967, accumulating a proud 23-year service life that perfectly bridged the massive transition from a World War II fleet hunter into a frontline Cold War patrol vessel. Their remarkable adaptability ensured that these legendary wartime hulls remained vital assets for decades. Commissioned on October 25, 1951, the Tang-class was the first post-war submarine designed entirely free from wartime manufacturing constraints. Engineers seized the unique opportunity to integrate all tactical lessons extracted from the Pacific Campaign, detailed design studies of captured German U-boats, and Project KO's analytical modeling of the ideal anti-shipping vessel for the emerging nuclear age. The result was a radical, shorter, deeper diving boat boasting unprecedented submerged speed, slicing through the water at over 18 knots compared to the single-digit speeds of older Gato and Balao classes. The lead boat was proudly named USS Tang, a deliberate tribute to Richard O'Kane's legendary wartime command. All 6 vessels in this pioneering class avoided the scrapyard in the 1970s and 1980s, instead being transferred to foreign allies to begin fascinating second careers. Tragically, Iran received the Trout and the newly christened Wahoo, only to lose both operational hulls when the 1979 Islamic Revolution abruptly cut off critical American technical maintenance. Nevertheless, the Tang-class permanently defined post-war American undersea architecture, serving as a vital bridge between conventional diesel legacy and the dawn of the nuclear era. Their innovative engineering set the standard for high-performance naval capabilities across the globe. On January 17, 1955, the USS Nautilus forever shattered the foundations of naval warfare with a single historic transmission, underway on nuclear power. In those 4 words, every diesel-electric submarine on Earth became instantly obsolete. Driven by a revolutionary Westinghouse S2W pressurized water reactor, the Nautilus possessed true, unlimited submerged endurance. She could cruise at a sustained 23 knots indefinitely, without ever needing to surface, refuel, or expose a snorkel. The Nautilus was the brilliant, hard-nosed creation of Admiral Hyman Rickover. His absolute insistence on rigorous safety protocols, meticulous documentation, and unyielding training standards established a culture of zero-defect operations. This relentless discipline forged a legendary record, maintaining an unblemished safety record for over 70 years across hundreds of American naval reactors. On August 3, 1958, the Nautilus achieved the impossible by completing the first submerged transpolar crossing, navigating seamlessly beneath the thick ice cap of the North Pole for 96 continuous hours. By conquering this final frozen frontier, this single atomic vessel transformed the entire global ocean into a vast, unrestricted domain for American power, rewriting naval strategy for the modern Cold War era. Her triumph fundamentally solidified America's absolute dominance beneath the global waves for generations to follow. In the high-stakes race for atomic supremacy, the USS Seawolf served as a bold, multi-million-dollar experiment. Built as a direct alternative to the Nautilus, the Seawolf tested a liquid sodium-cooled reactor concept against the standard pressurized water approach. Her unique S2G reactor utilized molten liquid metal as a coolant, a cutting-edge technique that offered theoretically higher thermal efficiency and greater power output. While Admiral Hyman Rickover personally preferred pressurized water technology, he aggressively authorized both programs simultaneously to find the absolute best option for the fleet. Commissioned in March 1957, the Seawolf operated effectively until December 1958, when a dangerous internal sodium leak forced an immediate, permanent shutdown. Recognizing the severe hazards of liquid metal, the Navy replaced the experimental system with a standard pressurized water reactor in 1959. The sodium-cooled approach was permanently abandoned for all naval applications. This critical experiment cost an extra $30 million beyond original development budgets, but produced one definitive, invaluable lesson. Pressurized water was the correct, safe choice for nuclear propulsion. Every single American nuclear submarine built since 1959 has relied exclusively on pressurized water reactor technology. This pivotal determination solidified the safety parameters that would define the future of undersea warfare. The 4 submarines of the Skate class, commissioned between 1957 and 1959, holds historical significance as the United States Navy's very first production class of nuclear-powered vessels. This groundbreaking program successfully integrated the pioneering propulsion technology of the Nautilus into a significantly smaller, more tactically efficient hull design. Utilizing compact S-3W and S-4W atomic reactors, these boats were 50 feet shorter and 1,200 tons lighter than their predecessor, dramatically reducing construction time and material costs while fully preserving the holy grail of unlimited endurance. The Skate class immediately proved its strategic worth in the frozen wastes of the far north. In February 1959, the lead boat, Skate, completed the first historic wintertime transpolar voyage, courageously punching through the thick Arctic ice to surface 9 separate times. This stunning feat established a terrifying new strategic capability that Cold War planners instantly woven into attack and ballistic missile doctrines. In February 1960, sister ship Sargo completed the first midwinter under-ice transit of the treacherous Bering Strait. The Skate class effectively transformed perilous under-ice deployments from exceptional stunts into routine operations, a vital tactical edge before Soviet submarines began operating under the very same ice. They redefined the geometry of global nuclear deterrence. The revolutionary Skipjack class beautifully married the endless power of the Westinghouse S-5W reactor with the innovative, hydrodynamically flawless albacore teardrop hull form. This lethal combination fused atomic endurance with absolute aerodynamic efficiency underwater. The result was an apex predator, a submarine that could sustain speeds of over 29 knots submerged indefinitely. She was faster than any surface warship in service, faster than contemporary enemy torpedoes, and far ahead of any operational Soviet submarine of the era. The Skipjack class permanently rendered conventional diesel submarines obsolete in modern fleet engagements. However, this extreme performance pushed engineering boundaries, sometimes with tragic consequences. On May 22, 1968, the USS Scorpion mysteriously vanished approximately 400 miles southwest of the Azores, taking 99 brave crew members with her. A grueling naval investigation concluded the most probable cause was the inadvertent internal activation of one of her own Mark 46 torpedoes, which tragically homed onto the submarine itself. The mangled wreck of the Scorpion was discovered in October 1968, resting in nearly 10,000 feet of water. Coming just 5 years after the Thresher disaster, the loss left a profound chill across the entire submarine force. The deep ocean holds their secrets forever. The Thresher and Permit classes introduced a revolutionary paradigm to underwater warfare, permanently establishing the blueprint for the modern, whisper-quiet attack submarine. These vessels prioritized stealth and detection over raw battery power, featuring a radical bow-mounted sonar sphere that forced torpedo tubes to be relocated amidships. They utilized quiet water impulse launch systems rather than noisy compressed air. But this leap in deep diving capability came at a horrifying price. On April 10, 1963, the lead ship, USS Thresher, suffered a catastrophic failure during a deep test dive and imploded 8,400 feet down, killing 129 men. The tragic loss uncovered 145 specific construction and maintenance flaws, prompting the immediate creation of the strict sub-safe quality assurance program. The remaining vessels, renamed the Permit class, were completed with rigorous sub-safe modifications and became the most capable anti-submarine platforms in the world through the mid-1970s. The advanced passive sonar technology introduced by this class fundamentally altered the rules of the Cold War. It shifted undersea competition away from raw speed and torpedo range, transforming it into a high-stakes chess match of passive acoustic intelligence and absolute silence. Their sacrifice ultimately saved countless future lives beneath the waves. Born from the intense panic of the early Cold War, the George Washington class was constructed in a breathtaking 33 months. Racing from congressional authorization in August 1957 to the historic first submerged Polaris missile launch on July 20, 1960. Driven by the terrifying shock of the Soviet Sputnik launch, this crash program represented the fastest development and deployment of a strategic nuclear delivery system in United States military history. These innovative vessels featured a massive 16-tube missile bay. They initially carried Polaris A-1 missiles with a 1,200-mile range, later upgrading to deadly A-3 variants that could strike targets 2,500 miles away. With 5 boats in service, 18 nuclear-tipped missiles were continuously on patrol at the peak of the Cold War. Any adversary contemplating a disarming first strike was suddenly forced to confront the absolute certainty of devastating nuclear retaliation from invisible phantoms lurking in the deep. While the pioneering George Washington class has long since been retired and dismantled, the foundational strategic doctrine of continuous, unlocatable oceanic deterrence that it single-handedly created remains fully operational today, safeguarding the nation from the shadows of the deep. Their rapid construction stands as a testament to American industrial resolve under pressure. The 5 submarines of the Ethan Allen class marked a vital milestone, serving as the first vessels designed from the keel up specifically as ballistic missile submarines, rather than being hastily modified from existing attack submarine hulls. Their massive 410-foot hulls accommodated a 16-tube Polaris missile battery, optimized internal magazine arrangements, and vastly improved crew habitability standards required for grueling 60-day underwater deterrence patrols. On May 6, 1962, the lead ship made history in the remote Pacific. From a fully submerged position, she launched a live Polaris A-2 missile in the only live nuclear test ever executed by a United States submarine. The missile flew flawlessly, detonating its warhead 11,000 feet above Christmas Island as part of Operation Dominic. This historic test conclusively proved to the world that America's underwater nuclear deterrent worked exactly as designed. Under the strict mandates of the SALT I Treaty in the 1980s and 1990s, all 5 hulls had their missile tubes permanently removed to meet weapon ceilings. The class that executed America's only live undersea nuclear launch concluded its lengthy service as conventional attack submarines. Their pioneering lineage solidified the dual-crew blueprint that defines the modern strategic submarine force to this day. The 37 submarines of the Sturgeon class served as the absolute backbone and invisible workhorse of the United States Navy's undersea fleet through the tensest years of the Cold War. Commissioned between 1967 and 1975, this prolific class introduced two game-changing technologies: the revolutionary towed array sonar and the devastating Tomahawk cruise missile. These advancements completely transformed the traditional attack submarine from a purely anti-ship platform into a lethal long-range land attack system capable of striking inland targets over 1,500 miles away. Operating in absolute secrecy, these crews engaged in dangerous cat-and-mouse games deep beneath the oceans. In 1974, the USS Pintado collided violently with a Soviet submarine in the Pacific, an international incident that remained heavily classified for 25 years. Later, in 1978, the USS Batfish achieved a legendary intelligence coup, tracking 3 separate Soviet nuclear submarines across 3 weeks at close range. With 37 distinct hulls, the Sturgeon-class accumulated an unmatched record of highly classified deployments. Though the Cold War has ended, the full, harrowing accounting of what these silent warriors accomplished during their dangerous espionage missions remains partially redacted by the Pentagon. Their quiet dominance quietly turned the tide of the Cold War. The 31 ballistic missile submarines of the Lafayette, James Madison, and Benjamin Franklin classes represented the most massive deployment of sea-based nuclear deterrence in human history. Constructed rapidly between 1963 and 1967, these formidable ships initially bristled with 496 Polaris launch tubes. Over their lengthy service, they underwent terrifying upgrades, first converting to Poseidon C, 3 missiles carrying up to 14 independently targetable nuclear warheads, and later receiving long-range Trident I capabilities. This technical evolution fundamentally reshaped global nuclear strategy, making America's deterrent exponentially more survivable and precise. Operating on a relentless rotation, roughly half of the entire fleet was hidden beneath the world's oceans at any given moment. That meant 15 invisible submarines carrying 240 nuclear missiles and up to 3,300 warheads stood constantly ready to strike for 39 consecutive years. Amazingly, these 31 legendary boats completed their entire operational lifespans without ever launching a single nuclear weapon in anger. They achieved absolute strategic success, not by destroying enemy cities, but by making the catastrophic alternative of global war entirely unthinkable to any foreign adversary. Their silent vigil stands as one of the greatest defensive achievements in modern military history. The legendary Los Angeles class, comprising 62 hulls commissioned between 1976 and 1996, stands as the largest nuclear submarine production program ever executed. Powered by the massive General Electric S-6G reactor producing 35,000 shaft horsepower, these lethal hunters attained blistering submerged speeds exceeding 31 knots. The advanced 688I improved variant added 12 vertical launch system cells, transforming the class into devastating strike platforms. Los Angeles-class submarines proved their land attack dominance on the world stage, firing 288 Tomahawk cruise missiles during Operation Desert Storm. Years later, in March 2003, they unleashed over 800 Tomahawks during the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom, completely neutralizing hostile air defenses and command structures. The sheer structural integrity of the design was proven in a terrifying accident on January 8, 2005, when the USS San Francisco slammed into an uncharted undersea mountain at full speed. Despite having her bow completely crushed and losing one crew member, the submarine survived an impact that should have destroyed her, a direct testament to the strict sub-safe engineering protocols. Today, 26 of these iconic warships remain on frontline active duty worldwide. Their unmatched service legacy cements their place as titans of modern naval warfare. The monumental Ohio-class carries more raw, destructive potential within its hull than any other weapon system developed in human history. A single Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine armed with 24 Trident 2D5 missiles, each carrying 8 W-88 475 kiloton warheads, wields an unimaginable total of 192 nuclear weapons. This equals a combined explosive yield of 91 megatons, surpassing the total destructive energy unleashed in all of World War II by a staggering factor of 45. The Trident 2D5 missile, boasting an operational range of nearly 7,500 miles and a circular error probable of 90 meters, stands as the most accurate submarine-launched ballistic missile ever deployed. To maximize versatility, 4 Ohio hulls were converted into heavily armed SSGN cruise missile transports. These stealth giants replaced their nuclear tubes with specialized vertical launchers carrying up to 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles and advanced lockout chambers for 66 elite Navy SEALs. Displacing 3 times more water than a standard Los Angeles-class hunter, the Ohio-class does not merely maintain global nuclear stability, it makes the concept of deterrence terrifyingly credible against the hardest targets on Earth. They remain the ultimate line of defense for the nation. Designed at the height of the Cold War to achieve absolute, unquestioned technological superiority over Soviet submarines, the Seawolf class was engineered completely without budget constraints. However, when the Soviet Union abruptly dissolved, the massive program was cancelled, leaving only 3 hulls of a planned 29. At a staggering $3.8 billion per vessel, each Seawolf cost more than a contemporary aircraft carrier, an exorbitant expense that could only be justified against a superpower threat that vanished overnight. Despite the scaling back, the completed vessels are arguably the most capable attack submarines ever built. Faster, quieter, deeper diving, and more heavily armed than any other platform on Earth. The third boat, USS Jimmy Carter, was heavily modified with a specialized 100-foot hull extension. This massive modification houses cutting-edge surveillance gear and advanced special operations equipment, transforming her into the most capable intelligence-gathering submarine in global service. Paradoxically, the Apex Predator, originally built to hunt advanced Soviet attack submarines, now spends her silent career collecting vital electronic intelligence on modern adversaries whose primary fleets were not even designed until after the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. Their silent mastery ensures that American espionage remains unmatched across the entire globe today. The Virginia-class represents a brilliant engineering masterclass designed to bridge the gap between astronomical costs and absolute underwater supremacy. Developed to deliver an incredibly capable nuclear attack submarine for $2 billion instead of $4 billion, it ensures no qualitative gap exists against modern adversaries. At its heart lies the advanced S9G reactor, featuring a revolutionary lifetime core that never requires refueling, effectively eliminating the most expensive maintenance event in naval operations. As threats evolved, so did the design. The upcoming Block 5 variants incorporate the massive Virginia payload module, an 84-foot hull extension that expands total vertical launch capacity to an incredible 65 Tomahawk cruise missiles per boat. Furthermore, the historic AUKUS agreement of September 2021 committed the United States to providing Australia with these advanced nuclear-powered hulls, marking an unprecedented transfer of highly guarded sovereign naval technology. However, the program faces significant manufacturing headwinds. The current industrial production rate of 2.3 boats per year remains heavily strained by severe domestic workforce and material constraints. Balancing the vital requirements of the United States fleet with international treaty obligations stands as the program's most critical, unresolved challenge. Its future success will dictate the balance of power across the Pacific. The upcoming Columbia-class is slated to become the most expensive and technologically advanced ballistic missile submarine ever engineered. Comprising 12 planned vessels costing an estimated $8.7 billion each, this monumental program represents the single largest capital procurement in United States Navy history, with a staggering total cost projection of $109 billion. Designed to replace the aging Ohio-class beginning around 2031, each submarine will feature a 16-tube missile bay carrying life-extended Trident II D5 missiles, equipped with upgraded navigation systems guaranteeing strategic viability through the 2070s. While the tube count is reduced from the Ohio's 24, the extreme accuracy of these modern weapons ensures full deterrence compatibility. However, the program is currently navigating severe manufacturing challenges that have already delayed the lead boat's tight construction schedule. The Navy currently projects the USS Columbia's initial delivery in fiscal year 2027, aiming for full patrol-ready status by 2031. Because the old Ohio hulls cannot be extended indefinitely, this strict timeline matters immensely. Any prolonged gap between Ohio retirements and Columbia deliveries presents a dangerous, non-theoretical vulnerability to the core of America's nuclear triad. The stakes for global stability have never been higher than they are now. USS Langley was the United States Navy's first aircraft carrier, a converted coal collier, whose flight deck was derisively called the covered wagon by the sailors who served aboard her. Commissioned on March 20th, 1922, she was converted from the Jupiter at Norfolk Naval Shipyard at a cost of $1.27 million, the lowest possible investment consistent with acquiring the operational experience the Navy needed before committing to purpose-built hulls. Her 15.5 knot speed was inadequate for fleet operations from the moment she was commissioned. Fleet carriers required 30 knots to maintain position relative to battleships. Langley was never intended to fight. She was a laboratory. The Navy used her to develop arresting gear systems, catapult technology, fighter direction doctrine, and deck landing procedures. Every foundational technique of carrier aviation was tested on her flight deck between 1922 and 1936. Converted to a seaplane tender in 1937 after being stripped of half her flight deck, she was delivering P-40 fighters to Java when Japanese aircraft caught her on February 27, 1942. 5 bomb hits left her dead in the water. She was scuttled by escort destroyers. Langley's value was never tactical. She was an investment in knowledge. That knowledge built the Essex class. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 was the accident that produced American carrier power. The treaty scrapped 2 partially built Lexington-class battlecruisers. A treaty exception permitted conversion to carriers up to 33,000 tons. The resulting USS Lexington and USS Saratoga displaced 36,000 tons, carried 90 aircraft, and could sustain 33 knots, creating, by legislative constraint, the most capable carriers in any navy. The 888-foot hull gave them flight decks large enough to operate aircraft generations beyond those available at commissioning. Their turbo-electric drive plants produced 180,000 shaft horsepower, giving them the power output of a light cruiser while carrying an air group that dwarfed any contemporary competitor. Lexington was lost at Coral Sea on May 8, 1942, sunk by internal aviation gasoline explosions after 2 torpedo hits, a damage control failure that led directly to redesigned fuel systems in subsequent classes. Saratoga survived the war, accumulating 7 combat damage incidents, was used to evacuate Allied POWs in August 1945, then expended at Bikini Atoll on July 25, 1946, in the Baker nuclear test. She sank 7.5 hours after detonation. USS Ranger was the first United States carrier designed and built as an aircraft carrier from the keel up, and an immediate demonstration of the cost of designing within treaty tonnage constraints without fully understanding what a fleet carrier needed to do. Built for $26.8 million at Newport News Shipbuilding and commissioned on June 4, 1934, her design sacrificed speed, protection, and seakeeping for aircraft capacity. 14,500 tons, 29.25 knots maximum, with no side armor and only light subdivision. Ranger was deemed too slow and too fragile for Pacific operations from the moment the war began. She spent her entire wartime service in the Atlantic, participating in Operation Torch in November 1942, where her aircraft attacked the French fleet at Casablanca, and in a 1943 carrier strike on German shipping off Norway that represented the only US carrier strike against German-occupied Europe. She was never sent to the Pacific. Fleet commanders considered her too vulnerable in a high-threat environment. Ranger's limitations identified precisely what the Yorktown class needed to improve: speed, protection, and endurance. She was scrapped at Baltimore in 1947. Her value was diagnostic. She showed the Navy what not to build. The Yorktown class corrected every deficiency Ranger had exposed. At 25,900 tons and 32.5 knots, the 3 ships, USS Yorktown, USS Enterprise, and USS Hornet, combined adequate speed, meaningful protection, and an air group of 90 aircraft into a hull that could actually fight fleet engagements. Enterprise became the most decorated U.S. Navy ship of World War II, earning 20 battle stars across every major Pacific campaign. Yorktown was sunk at Midway on June 7, 1942, after absorbing 3 bomb hits and 2 torpedo hits, damage that lesser ships would have succumbed to earlier. Her damage control teams kept her fighting long enough to recover aircraft from the strikes that sank Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu before she was finally lost to a submarine torpedo. Hornet was sunk at the Battle of Santa Cruz on October 26, 1942. Enterprise survived the entire war, participating in every major Pacific campaign from Pearl Harbor to the final strikes on Japan in August 1945. She was the most combat-experienced carrier in U.S. history. The Navy attempted to preserve her as a memorial. Congress refused the funding. Enterprise was sold for scrapping in 1958 over the objections of virtually every surviving Pacific veteran. The decision remains the most regretted in American naval preservation history. USS Wasp was built to consume the remaining U.S. carrier tonnage allowance under the Washington Naval Treaty, approximately 15,000 tons that could not support a full Yorktown-class hull. The Navy built the largest carrier the remaining tonnage permitted rather than waste the allocation. The result was a repeat of Ranger's fundamental problem in a slightly more capable hull: inadequate speed, inadequate protection, and marginal damage resistance. Wasp was commissioned on April 25, 1940, and immediately deployed to the Atlantic. She conducted 2 runs into the Mediterranean to deliver Spitfires to the besieged island of Malta in April and May 1942. In total, she delivered 94 Spitfires. Winston Churchill specifically requested her second run after the first batch of Spitfires was destroyed on the ground within hours of landing. Transferred to the Pacific in July 1942, Wasp was torpedoed by the Japanese submarine the WAL-19 on September 15, 1942, south of Guadalcanal. 3 torpedoes struck her. Aviation gasoline fires spread through the ship within minutes. She was ordered abandoned and sunk by U.S. destroyers. Of her crew of 2,247, 193 died. Her loss reduced U.S. carrier strength in the Pacific to exactly 1 operational fleet carrier, Enterprise, at the most critical moment of the Guadalcanal campaign. The Essex-class was the industrial answer to Pearl Harbor, 24 carriers built between 1942 and 1950, at a peak construction rate of 1 hull every 6 months. No warship class in history matched this combination of scale, capability, and production speed. The lead ship, USS Essex, commissioned on December 31st, 1942, exactly 389 days after Pearl Harbor. Each ship displaced 34,881 tons standard, carried 90 to 103 aircraft, and sustained 32.7 knots. The design incorporated lessons from every carrier loss through 1941. Improved aviation, gasoline isolation, separate fuel distribution systems, enhanced damage control subdivisions, and a hull strong enough to absorb torpedo hits without catastrophic structural failure. No Essex-class carrier was lost in combat. The class underwent 2 major post-war modification programs. SCB-27 angled the flight deck and strengthened the hull for jet operations, and SCB-125 added the enclosed hurricane bow and steam catapults. Modified Essexes served through Vietnam. USS Oriskany conducted the final carrier strikes of the Vietnam War in 1973. 4 hulls are preserved as museum ships: Yorktown, Intrepid, Hornet, and Lexington. The Essex-class fought and won 2 wars. It redefined what a carrier could be. The Independence-class was a wartime expedient that produced 9 light carriers in under 2 years, converted from Cleveland-class light cruiser hulls already on the ways, using a decision made in January 1942 and resulting in the first commissioning by January 1943. The conversion was fast because it was simple. Retain the cruiser machinery and hull, add a flight deck above the superstructure, accept the resulting narrow deck, and limited aircraft capacity as the price of speed. The CVLs were never intended to substitute for fleet carriers. They were designed to supplement them, providing additional aircraft density within a fast carrier task group. Where the Essexes provided the primary striking power, all 9 served in the Pacific. Princeton was lost at Leyte Gulf on October 24, 1944, sunk by a single Japanese bomb that detonated her torpedo magazine. The remaining 8 were decommissioned in 1946 and 1947. 4 were sold to France, where several served into the 1960s. San Jacinto was the ship aboard which Lieutenant George H.W. Bush was shot down on September 2, 1944, and rescued. The Midway class was designed to survive the Pacific War's most extreme threat environment, kamikaze attack, through sheer size and armoured flight decks. At 47,387 tons and 968 feet, the 3 ships, USS Midway, USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, and USS Coral Sea, were the largest warships in the world at commissioning, with 3.5-inch armoured flight decks and an original air group of 137 aircraft. All 3 commissioned after Japan's surrender. Midway and Roosevelt were extensively rebuilt under SCB-110 programs in the 1950s, receiving angled decks, enclosed bows, and jet-capable catapults. Midway received a further modernization in 1966 to 1970 that cost $202 million and extended her service life to 1992, 47 years of commissioned service, the longest of any post-World War II U.S. carrier. Midway served as the flagship of carrier operations during the Gulf War in 1991, launching combat sorties against Iraqi targets in the opening hours of Operation Desert Storm. Roosevelt was decommissioned in 1977 and scrapped. USS Midway is preserved as a museum ship in San Diego, where she remains the most visited museum ship in the United States. The Casablanca class is the most remarkable carrier production achievement in history. 50 escort carriers built at Kaiser Shipbuilding's Vancouver, Washington Yard in 14 months, from November 1942 to July 1944. Henry Kaiser applied prefabricated assembly line construction techniques to a warship hull, delivering a 512-foot, 8,188-ton carrier every 12 days at peak production. No naval construction program before or since has matched this tempo. Each ship carried 28 aircraft and could sustain 19 knots. The October 25, 1944, Battle off Samar demonstrated what happened when CVS encountered fleet combatants. A Japanese surface force of 4 battleships and 6 heavy cruisers engaged 6 Casablanca-class CVS. 3 CVS were sunk. The others survived through smoke, rain squalls, and the reckless courage of their escorts. The CVE contribution to the war was primarily logistical, ferrying aircraft, providing convoy cover in the Atlantic against U-boats, and supporting amphibious landings with close air support. All 50 were decommissioned within 2 years of the war's end. Their production speed had made them. Their tactical limitations made them obsolete the moment high-intensity combat ended. The Bogue class converted C-3 cargo vessel hulls into escort carriers under a program that ultimately produced 44 hulls, 11 for the US Navy and 33 for the Royal Navy. USS Bogue commissioned on September 26, 1942, establishing the template, a 495-foot flight deck over a commercial cargo hull, 18-knot maximum speed, and a small air group optimized for anti-submarine warfare. The Bogue class earned its place in history through the Battle of the Atlantic. Between March and July 1943, the critical turning point of the U-boat war, Bogue-class escort carrier hunter-killer groups sank or damaged 12 German submarines, directly contributing to the collapse of the German Wolfpack strategy. The TBF Avengers and FM-1 Wildcats operating from these small carriers proved that airborne ASW coverage could close the mid-Atlantic gap that shore-based aircraft could not reach. The tactical innovation was the Hunter-Killer Group, 1 CVE plus 4 or 5 destroyer escorts operating as an independent ASW unit. USS Block Island was the only US carrier sunk in the Atlantic, torpedoed by U-549 on May 29, 1944. The other 10 US bogues survived the war, all decommissioned in 1946. The Sangamon-class converted 4 Type T3 fleet oilers into escort carriers, a conversion that produced the largest and most capable CVEs in the US Navy by virtue of the tanker hull's generous beam and displacement. At 23,875 tons full load and 553 feet, the 4 ships, Sangamon, Suwannee, Chenango, and Santee, were substantially larger than the Bogue and Casablanca classes, with better seakeeping, more fuel capacity, and a marginally larger air group of 31 aircraft. All 4 participated in Operation Torch in November 1942, providing tactical air support for the North Africa landings. The Sangamon class demonstrated that converted tanker hulls could sustain extended combat operations more effectively than converted cargo hulls. Suwannee and Santee were both struck by kamikaze aircraft in October 1944 during the Leyte Gulf operations. Suwannee was hit on October 25, 1944 by a Zero that penetrated her hangar deck. 107 men were killed. Santee was hit by a kamikaze and simultaneously torpedoed by a submarine on the same day. Both survived through damage control. All 4 ships were decommissioned in 1945. The Commencement Bay class was the final and most capable CVE design, incorporating all lessons from the preceding escort carrier types into a purpose-optimized hull that was stronger, better arranged, and more survivable than the converted commercial vessels that preceded it. 19 hulls completed between 1944 and 1946. 7 commissioned too late for World War II combat. The class introduced unit machinery, all 4 boilers and both turbines in separate fire rooms and engine rooms, so that a single hit could not destroy the entire propulsion plant. The enhanced fuel isolation system addressed the aviation gasoline fire problem that had destroyed Lexington and contributed to multiple CVE losses. Several Commencement Bay-class ships served into the Korean War in the anti-submarine warfare role. The last of the class, USS Gilbert Islands, was redesignated as a communication relay ship and served until 1970, 26 years after commissioning, the longest CVE service life. The class bridged the wartime CVE concept into the Cold War ASW mission without being replaced by purpose-built designs until the 1960s. The Forrestal class defined the modern aircraft carrier. At 1,039 feet and 81,101 tons full load, USS Forrestal commissioned on October 1, 1955, as the largest warship ever built to that date. A ship with 4 steam catapults, 4 deck-edge elevators, an angled flight deck, and a hangar capable of accommodating jet aircraft that dwarfed everything in the World War II inventory. On July the 29th, 1967, a Zuni rocket accidentally fired on Forrestal's flight deck, triggering a catastrophic chain of explosions and fires that killed 134 sailors and destroyed 21 aircraft, the worst loss of life on a US carrier since World War II. The accident investigation led directly to revised ordnance handling procedures, improved firefighting training, and the development of Kevlar flight deck protective gear. Among the pilots who escaped the Forrestal fire was Lieutenant Commander John S. McCain. All 4 ships served through the Cold War, with Saratoga and Forrestal conducting extensive Vietnam War operations. Independence served in the Adriatic during Bosnia operations in 1994. Forrestal was decommissioned in 1993 and sold for scrapping in 2014. The class established the dimensions and capabilities that every subsequent US carrier has been built to match or exceed. The Kitty Hawk class was an improved Forrestal design with relocated machinery, revised elevator placement, and improved survivability features. 3 ships, USS Kitty Hawk, USS Constellation, and USS America, served as the Navy's primary conventional-powered supercarrier force from the 1960s through the early 2000s. USS John F. Kennedy was often grouped with the class, though built to a slightly modified design. All 3 Kitty Hawk-class ships conducted sustained combat operations in Vietnam, with Constellation deploying from 1964 through 1975. Kitty Hawk served in the Persian Gulf during both the 1991 Gulf War and Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, the last conventional-powered carrier to conduct sustained combat operations. America was decommissioned in 1996 and deliberately sunk as a target ship in 2005 after a 4-year underwater survivability study, the only US carrier intentionally sunk since World War II. Kennedy served until 2007, operating as the last conventionally powered US carrier in service. The class demonstrated that conventional propulsion remained viable for sustained carrier operations when nuclear power was unavailable or unaffordable. John F. Kennedy is being considered for preservation as a museum ship. USS Enterprise was the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, a technological achievement that altered the strategic calculus of naval power by eliminating the refueling constraint that limited conventional carriers to operational radii of roughly 2,000 miles. Commissioned on November 25, 1961, she was powered by 8 Westinghouse A2W pressurized water reactors producing 280,000 shaft horsepower, enabling a top speed in excess of 30 knots and theoretically unlimited range, constrained only by crew endurance and aircraft consumables. Enterprise cost $444.6 million, roughly 50% more than a Kitty Hawk-class ship, and her 8-reactor arrangement proved unreasonably expensive to maintain. The Navy built only 1 Enterprise before cost concerns drove development of a 2-reactor design for the Nimitz class. She served 55 years, the longest service life of any U.S. carrier, accumulating 25 deployments including Cuban Missile Crisis patrols in 1962, Vietnam operations from 1965 through 1972, and post-9/11 operations against Afghanistan in 2001. On January 14, 1969, a fire on Enterprise's flight deck triggered by overheated Mk-32 rocket motors killed 27 sailors. She was decommissioned in February 2017 and is currently being dismantled at Newport News. The Nimitz class comprises 10 nuclear-powered carriers built between 1968 and 2006, commissioned between 1975 and 2009, and currently constituting the backbone of U.S. carrier aviation. Each ship displaces 100,000 to 104,600 tons full load, is powered by two Westinghouse A4W reactors producing 260,000 shaft horsepower, and carries an air wing of approximately 90 aircraft, the most powerful combination of speed, endurance, and striking power ever assembled on a single platform. 10 ships constitute the class: Nimitz, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Carl Vinson, Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, John C. Stennis, Harry S. Truman, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush. Later, hulls incorporated progressive improvements in aviation facilities, electronic warfare systems, and survivability. The class has deployed in every major U.S. military operation since 1975, Operation Eagle Claw in 1980, Gulf War in 1991, Kosovo in 1999, Afghanistan in 2001, Iraq in 2003, and sustained counter-terrorism operations through the present. Theodore Roosevelt's COVID-19 outbreak in 2020, which incapacitated 1,271 crew members, demonstrated that biological threats constrained nuclear-powered warships as effectively as enemy weapons. The class is projected to serve through 2070 as the Ford class enters service. USS Nimitz commissioned on May 3, 1975, as the lead ship of the class and the second nuclear-powered carrier in U.S. service. Her construction cost of $1.881 billion reflected substantial investments in improved maintenance access, enhanced survivability, and expanded aviation facilities. The two-reactor A4W plant produced 260,000 shaft horsepower, with simpler maintenance cycles than Enterprise's 8-reactor arrangement. Nimitz's most consequential operational moment occurred on April the 24th and 25th, 1980, when she served as the launch platform for Operation Eagle Claw, the failed attempt to rescue American hostages in Iran. The operation launched from Nimitz in the North Arabian Sea. Helicopter, mechanical failures, and a mid-air collision in the Iranian desert ended the mission before it reached Tehran. 8 Americans died. The Eagle Claw failure accelerated the creation of U.S. Special Operations Command and the development of dedicated Special Operations aviation assets. Nimitz's role was instrumental, not in the mission's success, but in demonstrating the consequences of inadequate inter-service coordination. Her reactors were refueled during a 1998 refueling and complex overhaul at Newport News that cost $2.5 billion. The 9 ships following Nimitz represent progressive refinements across 3 decades of construction. Eisenhower through Theodore Roosevelt were essentially identical to Nimitz, with improved electronics. From Abraham Lincoln onward, enhanced aviation fuel capacity, revised island arrangement, and improved below-deck aviation ordnance systems were incorporated. John C. Stennis introduced the Mark VII arresting gear system. George H.W. Bush was the most extensively modified Nimitz-class hull, serving as a technology bridge to the Ford class with advanced weapons elevators, enlarged flight deck, and modified island. Theodore Roosevelt's deployment record includes the first carrier strikes of Operation Desert Storm on January 17, 1991, when her aircraft flew 4,200 sorties in 44 days. Abraham Lincoln was the site of President George W. Bush's Mission Accomplished address on May 1, 2003. Carl Vinson recovered the body of Osama bin Laden for burial at sea on May 2, 2011. Ronald Reagan is home-ported at Yokosuka, Japan, serving as the centerpiece of U.S. forward deterrence in the Western Pacific, the only U.S. carrier permanently based outside the continental United States. George Washington completed a refueling and complex overhaul in 2023 at a cost of $4.6 billion. The Nimitz-class, across 10 ships and nearly 50 years of service, has projected U.S. air power to every corner of the globe in a manner no other weapon system in history has matched. USS Gerald R. Ford commissioned on July 22, 2017 after a construction program that began in 2005, accumulated $2.4 billion in cost overruns, and delivered a carrier that incorporated more new technologies simultaneously than any U.S. warship in history. The A-1B reactor produces 700 megawatts, triple the A-4W's output, enabling the electromagnetic aircraft launch system to replace steam catapults, the advanced arresting gear to replace hydraulic arresters, and dual-band radar to replace multiple legacy radar systems. The sortie rate target of 160 sorties per day represents a 33% improvement over Nimitz-class sustained operations. The simultaneously introduced new technologies produced cascading failures during initial service. The EALS experienced 1.4 system failures per 100 launches in early testing against a requirement of 0.009. The advanced arresting gear required replacement of its control system after multiple failures. The weapons elevators failed operationally testing in 2017 and required 2 years of remediation. Ford was delivered with 22 unresolved deficiencies and was not considered fully combat capable until 2022. USS John F. Kennedy incorporated lessons from Ford's deficiencies and commissioned in 2024. CVN-80, Enterprise and CVN-81. Doris Miller are under construction at Newport News. The Ford-class's ultimate sortie rate capability remains unvalidated in sustained combat. The class represents either the future of carrier aviation or the most expensive technological gamble in naval history. Time and operational experience will determine which. USS United States was cancelled by Secretary of Defense Louis Johnson on April 23, 1949, 5 days after her keel was laid at Newport News shipbuilding, in the most abrupt and consequential carrier program cancellation in U.S. history. The ship was designed to operate AJ-1 Savage nuclear strike aircraft, providing the Navy with an autonomous strategic nuclear delivery capability that would give it a direct role in nuclear deterrence. Johnson's cancellation triggered what became known as the Revolt of the Admirals, a series of congressional hearings in 1949 in which senior naval officers publicly challenged civilian defense policy in unprecedented fashion. 4 admirals effectively ended their careers by testifying against the B-36 program's adequacy. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, immediately demonstrated that land-based air power could not provide the tactical flexibility naval aviation offered. Congress authorized the Forrestal-class in 1951. United States' cancellation had delayed the supercarrier program by 6 years and cost the Navy a generation of officer-civilian trust. The keel plates were scrapped, the lesson was retained. At the dawn of the 20th century, naval warfare faced an existential crisis. Proliferating torpedo boats threatened the supremacy of multi-million-dollar battleships. The answer? The Bainbridge-class, America's very first destroyers. Commissioned between 1902 and 1903, these 9 pioneering vessels DD-1 through DD-9 were explicitly engineered to hunt down and eliminate the torpedo boat threat before it could breach the battle line. Displacing 420 tons and capable of hitting 29 knots, these warships were large enough to chase adversaries into the open ocean. Yet, life aboard was a grueling testament to human endurance. Powered by coal-fired, triple-expansion engines, the ships required relentless manual labor, measuring crew watches in grueling hours of physical toil. Approximately 73 men lived in cramped, wet, and unforgiving conditions, accepting extreme hardship as standard naval service. Armed with two 18-inch torpedo tubes and 3-inch guns, they established a permanent, three-part institutional identity for the United States Navy. Screening the fleet, executing torpedo attacks, and maintaining close-in defense. Though they saw no major combat before USS Bainbridge was decommissioned in 1919, they forged the blueprint for every American destroyer that followed, cementing a legacy that redefined global naval doctrine. As a new decade loomed, the United States Navy aggressively evolved its fledgling destroyer force through 4 successive classes: the Smith, Paulding, Tucker, and Sampson. Totaling roughly 48 ships built between 1909 and 1917, this rapid technological sprint absorbed vital lessons from global naval exercises. Displacement climbed steadily from 700 to 1,100 tons. But the true revolution came with the Paulding class, the introduction of oil-fired turbine propulsion. This monumental shift completely eliminated the exhausting labor of coaling at sea, transforming naval endurance from human muscle to fuel tank capacity. Weapons capabilities surged as well, as the Tucker and Sampson classes integrated up to 12 tubes carrying the lethal 21-inch torpedo, which became the American standard. When World War I erupted, these hulls met the ultimate test in the Atlantic. Deploying to Queenstown Island in May 1917 under Rear Admiral William Sims, they spearheaded vital anti-submarine patrols and convoy escorts against German U-boats. Though limited in sheer numbers, these pioneering crews established the American destroyer force's very first sustained combat deployment, proving that these adaptable vessels were indispensable guardians of the high seas. Faced with the staggering threat of the German U-boat campaign in World War I, the United States launched the largest single destroyer production run in its history. Between 1917 and 1922, a staggering 273 flush-deck, 4-funnel destroyers were built, universally known as the Four Stackers. Produced at a breakneck pace of up to 1 ship per week, their distinctive unbroken flush-deck design prioritized construction simplicity over crew comfort, creating notoriously wet and perilous deck conditions in heavy Atlantic seas. Driven by 27,000 horsepower to a blistering 35 knots, these vessels carried an aggressive offensive punch of 12 torpedo tubes. However, high-speed fuel consumption severely crippled their tactical range. Decades later, in September 1940, 50 of these aging warriors found new life through the historic Destroyers for Bases agreement, traded to a depleted British Royal Navy in exchange for vital Western Hemisphere base rights. They served on the front lines of the Battle of the Atlantic. The remaining 4 stackers served the US Navy throughout World War II as escorts, minesweepers, and fast transports. The last of these legendary mass-produced ships were finally scrapped in 1949, closing a monumental chapter in industrial naval warfare. Following a 13-year hiatus in peacetime destroyer construction, the United States Navy unveiled the Farragut-class in 1934. These 8 innovative warships corrected the most glaring flaws of their World War I predecessors. Engineers abandoned the flat flush deck layout, restoring a raised forecastle that dramatically improved seakeeping and crew habitability in rough ocean waters. More importantly, the Farragut class marked the historic debut of the 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun. This revolutionary weapon could track and destroy enemy aircraft at high altitudes while retaining full capability against surface targets, eliminating the need for split armaments. Reaching 36.5 knots via modernized propulsion systems, the class solved the high-speed fuel consumption issues that plagued the older 4-stackers. All 8 ships fought extensively across the Pacific theater in World War II. Notably, on December 7th, 1941, USS Monaghan aggressively rammed and depth-charged a Japanese submarine at Pearl Harbor. However, tragedy struck in December 1944 when Monaghan and USS Hull capsized during Typhoon Cobra. This catastrophic loss exposed the class's marginal stability in extreme weather, delivering a harsh, vital lesson that would heavily influence the design of all future American surface combatants. Between 1936 and 1940, an intense doctrinal debate gripped the United States Navy, resulting in 46 destroyers spread across 5 closely related classes: Mahan, Gridley, Bagley, Benham, and Sims. Designers constantly wrestled with a critical question: should a destroyer be a torpedo-heavy strike ship or a balanced fleet escort? The Mahan class sought middle ground, whereas the Gridley and Bagley variants sacrificed guns to pack an astonishing 16 torpedo tubes. The Gridley class even clocked a blistering 42.8 knots on sea trials, making them the fastest American destroyers ever built. However, packing such extreme weight aloft severely compromised stability in heavy weather. This interwar experimentation faced a brutal reality check in the deadly surface actions of the Guadalcanal campaign from 1942 to 1943. Exposed to the lethal Japanese long-lance torpedo and masterful enemy night combat tactics, these ships paid a terrible price in blood and iron. Fierce night battles at Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Tassafaronga ultimately claimed 11 of the 46 ships. This costly Solomon Islands campaign became a grim, decisive laboratory, proving that over-specialized torpedo platforms sacrificed the vital anti-aircraft defense needed to survive modern naval warfare. As a global conflagration loomed, the United States Navy commissioned 96 Benson and Gleaves-class destroyers between 1940 and 1943. Emerging as the most numerous destroyer classes available during the attack on Pearl Harbor, these rugged warships became the backbone of Allied convoy protection during the most perilous phases of the Battle of the Atlantic. To correct the stability flaws of older designs, engineers reduced top weight and implemented reliable twin-screw propulsion, optimizing them for grueling ocean escorts. Armed with a potent 5-inch/38 dual-purpose battery and advanced anti-submarine weaponry like depth charges and hedgehog projectors, they adapted instantly to the shifting German U-boat threat. The era's high stakes were underscored when USS Reuben James, technically an older Clemson-class ship, acting in this escort role, was sunk on October 31st, 1941, marking America's first warship loss of World War II. Under Lend-Lease agreements, several Benson and Gleaves units transferred to Great Britain, Greece, and the Soviet Union, seeing brutal action in the Arctic. Operating through the Korean War and into the 1960s, their storied record solidified them as a legendary cross-hemisphere fleet asset. Born from the hard-fought lessons of early wartime losses, the Fletcher-class stands as the most produced and celebrated destroyer class in United States Navy history. Between 1942 and 1944, an astonishing 175 of these balanced warships were commissioned, anchoring every pivotal Pacific campaign from Guadalcanal to Tokyo Bay. Designers boldly increased displacement to 2,050 tons, unlocking the stability margin, deck space, and crucial crew habitability that previous classes sorely lacked. The result was a masterful multi-mission combatant. Armed with 5 5-inch/38 dual-purpose guns, 10 torpedo tubes, and a rapidly expanding array of Bofors 40mm and Oerlikon 20mm anti-aircraft weapons, the Fletcher-class could screen carrier task forces, spearhead amphibious landings, and hunt submarines with equal lethality. Their crews displayed legendary valor. During the Battle off Samar at Leyte Gulf, USS Johnston and USS Hoel launched daring, sacrificial charges against a massive Japanese fleet to protect vulnerable landing forces. Though 23 Fletchers were lost in the war, survivors served 11 nations throughout the Cold War. In a stunning display of longevity, Taiwan retired the world's last active Fletcher in 1999, outlasting the very global conflict it was built to fight. As World War II entered its final, bloodiest phase, the United States Navy faced a terrifying new threat in the Pacific: massed aerial kamikaze attacks. The answer was the Allen M. Sumner class, commissioned between 1944 and 1945. These 58 ships were a direct evolution of the Fletcher design, fundamentally re-engineered to prioritize overwhelming anti-aircraft firepower over single-gun accuracy. Engineers replaced the Fletcher's 5 single mounts with 3 innovative twin 5-inch/38 mounts, unleashing a staggering total of 6 guns for a far heavier broadside. This massive boost in volume of fire, combined with reinforced 40mm anti-aircraft batteries, came at the cost of increased top weight, which slightly reduced the ship's seakeeping margins. While retaining 10 torpedo tubes for surface actions, their primary mission had permanently shifted skyward. Following the war, Sumner-class destroyers provided vital shore bombardment during the Korean War. Their operational lives were dramatically extended during the early 1960s via the FRAM-2 modernization program, which added cutting-edge ASROC capability and updated Cold War electronics. Serving proudly in reserve and Allied fleets, the final American units were decommissioned in 1973, leaving a legacy of relentless adaptation. Representing the ultimate evolution of America's World War II destroyer design, the Gearing-class was built to conquer the vast, grueling distances of the Pacific Ocean. Stretching the predecessor Sumner hull by 4.1 meters, engineers packed in massive additional fuel capacity. Of the 152 ships originally ordered, 98 were completed between 1945 and 1946, while 54 were cancelled as global hostilities drew to a close. Though they arrived too late for significant World War II combat, these long-range warships quickly became the backbone of the post-war fleet. In June 1950, the lead ship, USS Gearing, fired the very first naval gunfire of the Korean War, kick-starting decades of frontline service. The class's true longevity, however, was unlocked by the revolutionary FRAM-1 modernization program in the early 1960s. This extensive overhaul stripped away obsolete World War II torpedoes to install the cutting-edge SQS-23 hull-mounted sonar and the ASROC standoff weapon system, transforming aging hulls into premier Cold War anti-submarine platforms. Surviving through the Vietnam War, the final American unit retired in 1979, though sister ships served foreign allies like Turkey into the late 1990s. In 1955, a bold new era of naval architecture dawned with the Forrest Sherman-class. As the first American destroyers designed entirely after World War II, these 18 innovative ships discarded wartime constraints to confront an existential threat, the rapidly growing Soviet submarine fleet. Built from the keel up explicitly for anti-submarine warfare, these vessels integrated an advanced aluminum superstructure to significantly reduce top weight, a revolutionary Bose sonar dome for superior acoustic tracking, and the powerful new 5-inch/54 caliber gun. This longer-barreled weapon provided unprecedented anti-aircraft range, anchoring NATO's vital strategy to keep Atlantic sea lanes open for European reinforcement. Recognizing the changing face of modern warfare, the Navy converted 4 of these hulls into guided missile destroyers in the mid-1960s, replacing traditional gun mounts and torpedo tubes with advanced Tartar surface-to-air missile systems. The Forrest Sherman-class served honorably in crucial gunfire support roles throughout the Vietnam War. They were progressively decommissioned between 1973 and 1988. Having successfully bridged the gap between legacy World War II gunboats and the highly automated, technologically advanced surface combatants of the late Cold War. Commissioned between 1960 and 1964, the 23 ships of the Charles F. Adams class permanently altered the landscape of naval warfare by introducing the DDG designation, the purpose-built guided missile destroyer. Armed with the revolutionary Tartar surface-to-air missile system, these warships fundamentally transformed fleet air defense. The Tartar's semi-active radar homing and impressive 18-kilometer engagement range provided a protective canopy that traditional 5-inch guns could never replicate. Combining this air defense umbrella with ASROC anti-submarine weapons and 2 5-inch/54 guns, the Adams class became the most comprehensively capable multi-mission destroyers of their era. Their highly successful design also established a vital precedent for international military cooperation. Modified variants were exported to key global allies, including 3 ships to West Germany's Lütjens class and 3 to Australia's Perth class. Acknowledged as versatile frontline assets, they provided critical naval gunfire support throughout the Vietnam War and stood guard during tense Cold War standoffs. The US Navy progressively decommissioned the class between 1975 and 1993. While the Australian variants remarkably pressed on until 2001, cementing over 4 decades of stellar frontline service across the globe. Entering service in 1975, the 31 ships of the Spruance class initially sparked intense congressional controversy. Critics lambasted the massive 7,800-ton vessels as visually underarmed. However, this criticism fundamentally misunderstood a monumental shift in naval warfare design. The Spruance class was engineered around revolutionary, space-consuming anti-submarine systems designed to neutralize the Soviet submarine threat. At its core lay the advanced SQS-53 Bose sonar and the SQR-19 towed passive array, delivering unprecedented underwater detection ranges, further extended by 2 onboard SH-60 Seahawk helicopters. These warships also pioneered the COGAG propulsion system, utilizing twin LM-2-500 gas turbines to achieve blistering acceleration from a cold start in mere minutes. The class's true genius lay in its modular hull design, which allowed for massive mid-life upgrades. The Navy eventually installed 61-cell Mk 41 vertical launch systems, equipping them with Tomahawk cruise missiles and transforming these dedicated ASW platforms into terrifying land attack juggernauts. Spruance-class destroyers delivered devastating strikes during both Gulf Wars. Progressively decommissioned between 2005 and 2006, many were sunk as targets in fleet exercises, proving their rugged structural resilience until the very end. The 4 ships of the Kidd class, commissioned between 1981 and 1982, represent one of the most fascinating and consequential procurement accidents in modern naval history. Dubbed the Ayatollah-class by US Navy sailors, these massive 9,200-ton warships were originally ordered by the Shah of Iran. However, the unexpected 1979 Islamic Revolution halted delivery, forcing the United States to inherit a fleet of nearly complete vessels. Built upon the proven Spruance-class hull, the Iranian design demanded heavily customized, multi-mission upgrades that exceeded standard American specifications. Engineers replaced the ASW-focused architecture with 2 twin-arm standard SAM launchers, heavily reinforcing area air defense alongside robust ASW capabilities, helicopters, and rapid-fire 5-inch guns. This unexpected windfall provided the US Navy with its most comprehensively armed destroyers until the advent of the Aegis era. After serving American interests through the twilight of the Cold War, all 4 vessels were sold to Taiwan between 2003 and 2005. Reflagged in the Republic of China Navy, these heavily armed warriors continue to serve as vital strategic deterrents against potential cross-strait conflict, remaining fully operational well past 2024. Commissioned in 1991, USS Arleigh Burke heralded the most radical technological leap in post-World War II naval history, the Aegis era. The 28 ships of Flight 1 and 2 entering service between 1991 and 2000 were built around the revolutionary AN/SPY-1D phased array radar and the integrated Aegis combat system. This milestone combination allowed a single vessel to simultaneously track hundreds of contacts and engage multi-domain threats, shifting the bottleneck of naval warfare from mechanical system limits to human crew processing speed. Central to this staggering multi-mission capability was the 90-cell Mk 41 vertical launch system, capable of firing standard SM-2 area defense missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and ASROC rockets in any tactical combination. While Flight 1 ships deliberately omitted a helicopter hangar to minimize top weight, restricting anti-submarine operations, the slightly modified Flight 2 series bridged the gap before production shifted. Deploying directly to the Persian Gulf within months of commissioning, these 8,422-ton warships fundamentally redefined the destroyer's role. They successfully replaced the specialized surface combatants of the Cold War with a singular high-tech platform capable of projecting decisive multi-domain power anywhere on Earth. Entering service in 2000, the 34 ships of the Arleigh Burke Flight 2A variant corrected the most significant operational limitation of their predecessors. By expanding the hull to incorporate 2 full-service helicopter hangars for SH-60 Seahawk helicopters, engineers dramatically extended the ship's independent anti-submarine warfare and surface surveillance capabilities across hundreds of square miles. Displacement grew to 9,238 tons, and the Mk-41 vertical launch system was expanded to 96 cells, providing massive added strike volume that would quickly face real-world deployment. Flight 2A destroyers became the primary tip of the spear during the opening hours of Operation Iraqi Freedom in March 2003, launching devastating Tomahawk cruise missile strikes against strategic leadership and infrastructure targets. These operations demonstrated that a destroyer could deliver the strategic effects traditionally reserved for aircraft carriers or massive cruisers. Equipped with the heavily updated SQQ-89 anti-submarine suite and modernized combat software, Flight 2A successfully countered emerging 21st century undersea threats. Though technically classified as destroyers for institutional and budgetary reasons, these heavily armed, highly versatile combatants possessed the displacement, firepower, and multi-domain dominance of modern guided missile cruisers. Representing the current pinnacle of American surface warfare, the Arleigh Burke Flight 3 class commenced in 2021 with the commissioning of USS Thomas Hudner. Built around the revolutionary AN/S PY 6V1 air and missile defense radar, this ongoing production run represents a massive evolutionary leap over legacy Aegis systems. The SPY-6 radar delivers an astonishing 30-fold increase in sensitivity, allowing Flight 3 ships to detect stealthy, low cross-section targets at unprecedented distances. This extreme capability shifts the class's primary mission to ballistic missile defense, directly countering modern hypersonic missiles and advanced cruise missile proliferation from state and non-state actors alike. Operating this massive radar required a complete overhaul of the ship's internal electrical generation systems. This power upgrade consumed valuable internal hull volume, forcing designers to retain the 96-cell VLS limit despite fleet pressure for expansion. Scheduled for continuous production through the mid-2030s alongside the developing DDG-X program, the Arleigh Burke lineage will achieve over 40 years of continuous manufacturing. This historic run cements it as the longest, most successful destroyer production line in American history, anchoring global maritime defense well into the mid-2040s. Designed as the ultimate stealth vanguard for the 21st century, the Zumwalt class represents one of the most technologically ambitious yet controversial programs in naval history. Originally planning a fleet of 32 ships, skyrocketing development costs forced the Navy to build just 3 hulls, with the lead ship commanding an unprecedented $8.6 billion. The 14,564-ton warships were built around the advanced gun system, a pair of automated 155mm cannons engineered to fire precision-guided munitions over 100 kilometers. However, when production cuts drove individual shell costs to a staggering $800,000, the weapon system became completely unsustainable, leading to the removal of all guns in 2021. Despite this setback, the class features a radical tumble-home hull form that dramatically slashes its radar cross-section alongside a massive 78-megawatt integrated electric propulsion system designed to power future directed energy weapons. Currently assigned to Surface Development Squadron 1 in San Diego, these futuristic vessels are being converted into long-range hypersonic missile strike platforms. While the execution remains a cautionary procurement tale, the Zumwalt-class stands as a bold, experimental leap into the future of low-observable maritime warfare.